Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. We need to pray. We need to pray that President Putin can save the Christians in Syria from the head choppers. It's looking bad over there, y'all. But before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, we got to start off our live back where we left off yesterday. The situation in Syria, World War III could be starting over there. The head choppers on the rampage. The U.S. has beefed them up. NATO is there with them. Zelensky got his warriors over there. Putin is doing what he can. Iran needs to do way more. Revolutionary salute, Queen. But the battle continues. But the Christians, their lives are on the line. Who's going to save them?
It is noteworthy that for the first time, Russian warships from Tartus launched a barrage of Caliber cruise missiles to bomb terrorist targets roaming Syria in the provinces of Idlib and Hama. Last night, December 5th, Syrian sources reported. Tartus, a Syrian port city near the northern Lebanese border, is the base of the Russian Navy fleet, where warships carrying Caliber missiles rained down on terrorist concentrations in areas they control in Idlib, also targeting HTS terrorist group around Mount Zainel Abidin in the north of Hama. It seems that B-261 Novorossiysk submarine and Admiral Grigorovich and Admiral Gorshkov class frigates, which a few days ago took part in exercises in Mediterranean Sea, fired cruise missiles in the form of Caliber on the mercenary terrorists supported by Turkey, surprising them due to their miscalculation while entering Syria. It is assumed that one exploded in Idlib as in the video footage, delivering a crushing blow from what was launched by the warship from the military port of Tartus. A woman's voice is heard screaming and a man reciting Islamic words, which were apparently added to the video for reasons of a media war like in Ukraine. Previously, pro-terrorist media and their supporters reported the complete withdrawal of the Russian Navy from Tartus due to the advancing terrorist forces, named opposition. But now, Caliber is fired from here. On the same night, Syrian army ambushed a major terrorist attack on Mount Zainel Abidin in the north of Hama. The army let them take control of the mountain for a while, manipulating the idea that they entered Hama at night, but ended up failing in clashes, including artillery fire packages fired by Syrian army. At least 300 terrorists from the elite HTS units were killed and the rest fled, Mayadin TV reported. Thus, the joint Russian-Syrian forces are ready for a direct confrontation with the terrorists at this stage. It seems Syria does not to repeat the same mistakes from decades ago. This time it will clean everything up once and for all, and expel the US from Syrian oil refineries.
He is a friend of the show. He is a frequent flyer here. We have Pepe Escobar, geopolitical analyst and journalist. Welcome back, Pepe.
Great to be with you, Danny. And the Donetsk mug sends you her best. And obviously, she's perplexed because she is in Afghanistan and she doesn't understand anything.
Well, I appreciate the well wishes, Pepe, from the one of the biggest sites of resistance to NATO. Let us get to this, though. Let us get to the big news of late, Pepe, which is the fact that we are back to the moderate rebels. The so-called moderate rebels are on the march again, this time called HTS and a variety of other groups backed by Turkey, the US, NATO, Israel providing cover. I wanted to ask you, Pepe, what has been your impression of this, and how will Russia and Syria respond from here? We see clashes. We see, especially Hama being now the front lines of this renewed war where there is pushback from the Syrian Arab Army and Russia. But in my estimation, I saw, and both of us followed this quite closely during the most devastating years of the dirty war in Syria. We
Mm.
saw Russia step up huge, especially with air power. How is this going to turn out in your estimation as this renewed war in Syria emerges and continues to develop?
Well, Danny, and all of you watching us, this was a disaster in the making, and it had to happen. Let's say it took 4 years to happen. It could have happened before. But since 2020, this was more or less inevitable. Why 2020? Because on 2020, they froze the war. And even worse, starting in 2018, I think many of you will remember that in 2018, Damascus was being besieged by a conglomerate of Al Qaeda remnants, post Al Qaeda, sub Al Qaeda, crypto Al Qaeda, whatever you name it, they are all derivations of Al Qaeda. And part of the what they had agreed, Russia and Syria, more or less in 2018, was to force these people who were besieging Damascus to go to Idlib. So this, let's say this was a sort of pre-deal before the big deal in 2020, which was more or less the Russians telling Turkey, get rid of these people and take them somewhere else, or let them stay where they are, which was already Idlib. So in 2020, can you imagine? The war was frozen in 2020 with this deal, which was basically Russia telling Turkey what to do, and Idlib became terror central, especially for Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is the previous Nusra Front. The commander, the emir, let's say the emir in charge, Julani, he cut off all his previous connections with Al Qaeda and with ISIS as well, renamed the new batch Hayat Tahrir al Sham, but it's more or less the same thing. And he got a lot more Salafi jihadis from literally everywhere, especially the arc from Turkey across Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, all the way to Uyghurs in Xinjiang in China, and Uyghurs who do the back and forth between Xinjiang and some of the Central Asian states. So what? At least 100,000 in Idlib. Can you imagine? You freeze a war and you leave an absolutely essential part of your territory, northwest Syria, practically a whole province dominated by Salafi jihadis. You knew that they were going to counterattack sooner or later. Obviously, complacency sets in, which is what happened with Damascus and with the Syrian Arab army. At the same time, of course, the Americans and NATO saw this fabulous opening. What did they start to do? They started to re-weaponize and weaponize these new batches of Salafi jihadis from all over, from all across Eurasia, we can say, including Turks as well. Not to mention the ones who are doing the back and forth, crossing from Turkey to Syria, literally non-stop. To give you an idea of to all of you, there are some parts of Istanbul, on the Asian side of Istanbul, where local people, they actually joke about it. You want to talk to Salafi jihadists, to HTS, to former Al Qaeda, and all that? Take the ferry and go to the Asia part. They're all there, and they are. I've seen them. And Gaziantep, of course, Gaziantep on Turkey on the border with Syria, which is the major crossing point for these people. In fact, this since 2011, 2012, for the past 12 years, nonstop. So this was a tragedy begging to happen. And this time, what happened? The timing was absolutely outstanding. Let me repeat to you the key dates. It's in the start of my new column, which it's not published as we speak now, but will be out either Wednesday night, Moscow, or Thursday. So these 3 dates are very, very important because they give you, this timeline gives you the background story of why this invasion of Aleppo happened on November 26th. Okay, November 18th, the chief of Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, he meets with the heads of the MIT, Turkish intelligence. Very, very important. 1 week later, November 25, NATO, the new NATO Gouda or Edam, depending on the Dutch cheese of your preference, Mark Rutte, he meets with Erdogan in person. What happens November 26th, the day after? All this Salafi jihadi toxic matrix, let's put it this way, assembled by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, former Nusra Front, supported by Turkish intel, weaponized by Turkish intel, trained by Turkish intel. And all this immense coalition, I call them the Rent a Jihadi coalition, in fact, because these are old Al-Qaedas, new Al-Qaedas, crypto Al-Qaedas, reconverted from ISIS, you name it, plus new recruits for Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, because they have an enormous recruiting network all the way from Turkey, all the way to Xinjiang. They started their lightning fast strike against Aleppo, especially. So let's say moving greater Idlibistan from Idlib to Aleppo provinces. The provinces are contiguous, right? And they took over most of Aleppo. We can say the first 48 hours. In less than 48 hours, they took 3/4 of Aleppo and the surroundings. So it was bound to happen. Everybody must have been startled across the global south. But if you were following Syria, and if you were following the complacency, and if you were following the fact that the Syrian Arab army was not upgraded, was not paying attention to the new rules of war, to drones, FPV, kamikaze drones, observation drones, etc., you knew that this was going to happen. Now, obviously, the US and NATO were paying attention and said, okay, this is our opening. And of course, the timing, because this was directly afterwards the so-called ceasefire in Lebanon, which is not exactly a ceasefire because it was already broken, I think, as we speak, over 100 times by Israel. Correct me if I'm wrong. And of course, Netanyahu on the record, saying on the record more than once that the new focus now is to concentrate on the Iranian threat, between commas, and at the same time that he had already warned Hezbollah once again that anything that they do in terms of the Syrians do in terms of facilitating transportation of weapons and missiles from Iran via Syria to Hezbollah, Syria, sorry, would pay an extremely high price. So this is all interconnected. So what do we see in this whole interconnection? US, NATO, Turkish intel, and Israel. There's no question that at different levels and different dispositions, they organized, weaponized, financed. Just to give an idea to all of you, do you know that in this invasion of Aleppo, there was even a tank division? So can you imagine these Salafi jihadis barely eating one kebab a day in Idlib, having access to a tank division? Yes, a tank division. And they organized the whole thing with at least 15,000 very well-trained Salafi jihadis, mostly HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. So now, what is let's say this is the mini answer to one of your questions. What are the Russians and the Syrians doing at the moment? They're starting to pick up the pieces if they can. Of course, as you mentioned, this line of defense that they established, earlier this week, was solidified basically this Tuesday, but it's still back and forth. There are lots of battles along this line of defense north of Hama. But if you look at the map, it's moving all the time. And there's no security guaranteed for Hama, and then from Hama to Homs as well, because they can they can do some bypasses and then circumvent this line and show up in Homs, south of Hama. So the situation in Aleppo and from Aleppo to Hama is dire. It's absolutely horrible. One of the things that I try to emphasize in my column as well, that wars in West Asia, they tend to be on the road. They are usually on the road affairs. So if you control the key roads or key highways, this is what we need. They are HTS and the Renta Jihadi mob. They already control the M4. In fact, I remember because I traveled these roads many years ago. At the times of Hafez Assad, I crisscrossed Syria. So I remember, I still have these roads in my mind, including the road that goes through the desert all the way to the Syria-Iraqi border. So if you remember how they are, the importance of these roads, of course, and how it's so easy to block them if you wanted. They blocked the M4. It was very, very easy. And now they are trying to block the most important highway in Syria, which is the M5, Aleppo-Damascus. If they do that, wow, it's going to be even more of a mega nightmare for the Syrian Arab Army, SAA. Okay, there is, let's say that there is an incipient organization in terms of trying to organize a counter offensive. The best forces, Syria forces, the 25th Brigade, they are already in the area around the Hama. The IRGC General Ghaffari, which is very well known in Iraq and in Iran and even in Syria as the butcher of ISIS. It was always on the front line in the fight against ISIS. He came from Iran as well. He's trying to organize sectors of the resistance and counteroffensive. Several brigades from Iraq, from Hashd al-Shabi, the Fatemiyun brigade. The Fatemiyun is very interesting because many of them are Afghans. I met these guys years ago in in Iran, in fact. And most of them are Afghans, Shiite Afghans. Very, very interesting. And there are also Christian brigades, Yazidi brigades from Iraq. So we can see that there's the beginning of an organization for a counteroffensive. But for the moment, the situation is absolutely terrifying from the point of view of Damascus and the Syrian Arab Army. This does not say that there's going to be regime change tomorrow in Damascus. No, we're very far away from that. But in terms of conquest of territory, if you look at the map, it's wow. They conquered a great deal of Aleppo province. So now they control not only Idlib, but also a great deal of Aleppo province. And we're not even talking about the Kurds, which I'm leaving these for one of my next columns. The role of the Kurds, which are basically American allies, which means they are basically NATO people as well. And some factions are fighting the Salafi jihadis, and some are doing deals with them. And some are trying to press the Syrian Arab army for some extra deals as well. So it's a mess. It's an absolute mess, totally predictable, considering the major strategic blunder in 2020 of freezing a war with nearly 100,000 terrorists inside your own nation. So that's the short version, Danny, of what's going on.
Yeah, no, I mean that's no, very detailed analysis. And I wanted to ask then, given the situation, because what we're seeing, we have reports of the United States also bombing the northeastern part of Syria, to protect those very forces that you're talking about. You have Mr. Nebenzia exposing the permanent representative of Russia at the UN, at the Security Council, exposing what many people aren't talking about, that the US is also occupying Syria in the northeast and has been for this duration of the period that you just outlined, Pepe. So I want to ask you, with this counteroffensive coming, Russia will be a big part of it. We know Iran has also vowed assistance if Syria asks for it. We also know, as you said, the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces are on their way. Syrian Arab Army and Russia, it seems like at a more minimal scale, are trying to hold things back until then. But I wanted to ask you, given now that we're seeing northeast and now northwest Syria, and they're trying to move south, it seems like to cut off Syria from Lebanon in many respects, which makes me wonder about the Israel connection. So I wanted to ask you, Pepe, when this counteroffensive does launch, what can and will Russia and Syria do? Because last time they had to deal with this, it was a very intense and in long duration air campaign. Yes. Do we see the same thing happening?
Can you imagine, Danny, and all of you, that they're going to have to reconquer Aleppo again? It took years to reconquer all parts of Aleppo, to pacify Aleppo, and then Aleppo started to develop again. The souk, which is probably, in my opinion, is the most beautiful, most fascinating souk in West Asia for centuries, was rebuilt. Most of it was rebuilt. All the area between the souk and the citadel was pristine again. And now they're going to have to fight all these Al-Qaeda remnants, derivatives, cryptos, or whatever, all over again, and from a very unfavorable position. Russia is very, very complicated situation because there were several objectives behind this lightning strike attack against Aleppo. One of them we already touched upon. It's cutting off the lines of communication between Iran and Hezbollah passing through Syria. Another one, to basically divide and rule and sow division and mistrust, extreme mistrust between Tehran and Ankara. That was one of the US, NATO, Israel objectives as well. And the third one, from the Russian point of view, is very, very worrying because we don't know how this is going to play out. It would force Russia to transfer mostly aerospace assets from Novorossiya, from the proxy war in Ukraine to Syria, if you want to make sure that they're going to keep Syria. Very, very worrying number. I was checking this a few minutes ago. Do you know that the Salafi Jihadi Brigade is only 40 kilometers away from the Russian Hmeimim base in Syria, air base? So obviously they're looking at this in Moscow and they're starting, now they are shaking a little bit in their boots. There's no question about that. They couldn't, these guys, these Salafi jihadis could start throwing Grad missiles against the Russian base sooner or later. And then wait for the Russian reaction, because with what they have at the moment, I'm not sure they have enough. They're going to have to, they're going to have to be a lot of Antonovs landing in Latakia, for instance, to bolster Russian. And that brings us to what happened yesterday, Danny. Very, very interesting. You know what happened yesterday? Erdogan picked up the phone and called Vladimir Putin.
Yes.
We were, before that, about during the weekend and early this week, we were all debating, how is he going to explain to Putin that this whole thing happened because of the Americans, because of the Israelis, that in Turkey had nothing to do with it, which, by the way, was the version of his foreign minister, Hakan Fidan. He's a very serious guy. He has presidential ideas in his head for the future, but he's a competent foreign minister, at least so far. And he was the former head of Intel of MIT, Turkish Intel. How curious is that? So Hakan Fidan now, as a diplomat, will say, look, we disapprove everything that's going on. We have nothing to do with this, right? At the same time, they express their support, between commas, to the Syrian opposition. So what is it? Once again, Erdogan hedging, obviously, right? So coming back to the phone call, Erdogan picks up the phone, he calls Putin, and according to the leaks that we had, you know what Erdogan was talking about? Turkey-Russia economic relations, geoeconomic relations, including Syria. So basically, this was a very wily way from Erdogan's part to tell Putin, look, we're going to have to negotiate a lot of things, including our presence now in northwest Syria. Can you offer us something extra in our geoeconomic relations, considering that for Russia, Turkey is very important in terms of being the bridge between Russia and the West. Most of it is via Turkey now. And every time that I go to Istanbul, I see this, you see this in front of you everywhere. The number of Russian tourists, the facilities for Russians who are investing in Turkey, or Turks who want to invest in Russia. There are bipartisan committees here and there. The fact that still the best way from Europe to reach Moscow is via Istanbul. So Turkish Airlines, they are making fortunes with this whole story. And all of us are victims now because they jack up their prices. So, both economies are very interconnected. And of course, Russian investments in Turkey, building nuclear plants, selling energy, etc. So while Erdogan is trying to renegotiate some of this in better terms for Turkey, and implicit in all that is that no, nothing's going to happen to Latakia and Hmeimim. We have nothing against you, of course. We could not control all these terrorists. We don't like these terrorists and all that. And obviously, Erdogan is not thinking about Idlib and Aleppo. He's thinking about the Kurds, because the Kurds are the big internal domestic problem for Turkey. So we can imagine more or less what they discussed, but I'm not sure Putin was convinced with this phone call that MIT, Turkey's MIT, their intelligence services, obviously they were, they will continue to be implicated to to their medullas in all this story. So how can Russia realistically preserve the basis? Very, very important. The connections, the commercial, geoeconomic connections with Turkey as well, without smashing the whole thing. From the point of view of Putin, in fact, Erdogan is a traitor. So what happened from the point of view of not only Putin, but I would say the Security Council, they look at what happened and say, the Turks just broke the Astana process. And the Astana process is Russia, Turkey, Iran. How can they trust Turkey after what happened? So we can say that the Astana process there's going to be a meeting in Qatar before the end of the week. I don't think this is going to go anywhere. The Astana process, as we knew it for the past few years until last week, now it's dead. They're going to have to start all over again. So very, very important as well in big picture terms. We have a BRICS partner, Turkey, betraying two top BRICS at the same time, Russia and Iran. There will be consequences. It's too early, of course. We don't know how this is going to develop, but we can imagine that from now on, the Russians are going to start thinking 2 times, or 3 times, or 10 times before, in fact, signing or agreeing with Turkey on anything, especially Syria. And of course, in terms of the axis of resistance, it's a mega extra problem because, of course, the whole chessboard in West Asia is metastasizing into a giant war, in fact, a giant unified war. It's not little wars here and there. No, it's a giant unified war. That's why I already started to qualify it alongside one of my dear analyst friends from the Global South website as the first BRICS war. This is something that we're gonna need to develop further in our next columns and podcasts, etc., because it pits essentially the usual NATO stand against Eurasia, great confrontation of the 21st century. But now subdivided into NATO stand and Israel on one side, with the support of NATO member Turkey, which is also a BRICS partner, mostly against BRICS partners at the top, at the highest level, Russia and Iran. And we didn't even analyze the role of China yet, because China is watching from the sidelines, and I'm sure they are horrified by everything that is happening, but there's absolutely nothing they can do. They could, if they wanted to help Syria, and this is something many of us started discussing for the past 2 years at least, that via their network of investments and even the new development bank, the NDB in Shanghai, China could have done more to help Syria and reconstruction of Syria. So now this is all, for the moment, now this is all dead. Let's see how China reacts in practice to this Salafi jihadi offensive in Syria. But from the point of view of the dire situation for both Iran and Russia at the moment, wow. Especially because there was not even a discussion in Tehran or in Moscow until a few days ago that this might happen. And everybody knew that this was a nightmare, just waiting to happen. And now that it's happened, and now this is a tactical victory for US, NATO stun, Israel, and from the point of view of Turkey, extracting concessions from both Iran and Russia. Let's see what's going to happen next. But I would say the prospects for both, Danny, are not very, very, very auspicious, to say the least. Can you imagine? There are little bits of info that start. Uh, for instance, a few minutes ago, can you believe that they capture a radar of one of the S-400s in a base in Hama? This radar is worth millions of dollars, and now it's in the possession of Salafi jihadis from Greater Idlibistan. They can do anything they want with it. They could even sell it to Turkey if they want, which would be probably their first move, or they could even sell it to Kiev. Don't forget that
Yes, the
the
Ukraine
less
factor.
exactly the lessons that these HTS Salafi jihadis received on everything, scrambling communication lines, artificial intelligence, communication services, and all that, Ukrainians. It was part of that famous deal that they struck months ago, if not last year, late last year. Okay, we give you everything that you need in terms of launching a war and FPV drones, kamikaze drones, how to operate drones. We'll send you instructors. We'll bring you here to teach, and you give us a lot of takfiris, a lot of Salafi jihadis, which are going to ship to fight Russia in Ukraine. We are watching in front of us the practical consequences of this deal. Obviously, nobody thought about this very, very carefully and in depth in Moscow. And this is a direct criticism of the Russians asleep at the wheel on Syria, once again. And this feeling in Damascus and also in Moscow that, we froze the war 4 years ago. These guys are confined in Idlib. Nothing's going to happen after that. We have a deal with Turkey, the Astana process. So everything is frozen. And we're going to try to find a solution later on. No, now it's too late. Now it's too late. They were overtaken by facts on the ground. And these facts on the ground are very, very nasty.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it appears that Russia, especially, will be, it almost feels like going back in time. It will have to prepare something of similar force when the conflict in Syria was at its height. And this gets me to wonder, Pepe, because what the Western mainstream media is saying is that all of the forces of multipolarity, if we want to call them that, are outstretched and outgunned at the moment. Russia and Ukraine, Iran. They say Iran is neutralized by Israel. A very interesting claim, but that's what they say. They say that's what everyone's saying in New York Times, elsewhere. And then, of course, you have Hezbollah in the so-called ceasefire arrangements with Israel and Lebanon, supposedly also being defeated by Israel. But really, what is being said, and they're harping on Russia in particular, is that they're outstretched and that they won't be able to reverse this tide. What do you make of these claims?
There are different. There are lots of nuances, Danny, and we have to watch in different levels and case by case basis. Hezbollah, yes, they are outstretched, but don't forget, they just won their confrontation against Israel. Israel was not capable of holding a single village in southern Lebanon. So, for all practical purposes, Hezbollah resistance won, paying an enormous price in terms of losing practically the whole leadership. They are rebuilding little by little, but they have the manpower and the brain power, especially, to rebuild very, very fast. All of us who have been to southern Lebanon and to Beirut and talked to Hezbollah think tankers or commanders, etc. We know how capable they are and how they rejuvenate in a Chinese Xi Jinping sense so fast. But for the moment, yes, they are outstretched and they need to rebuild. They need time. Syria, immensely outstretched, no questions, especially now. There's going to have some sort of purge in the Syrian Arab army. You know, they were literally asleep, especially asleep these past few months, especially these past few years, which explains
That's ridiculous.
why it was so easy to conquer Aleppo in 48 hours. Russia is not outstretched. Russia, after Oreshnik, they opened a new can of hypersonic worms that the West doesn't even know what it means. And Russia turned the whole game around, expelled the nuclear equation from the chessboard, in fact, and say, look, we have a weapon the moment we want against any of you, how we decided, and there's no defense against it, so you're going to have to live with it. So they're not outstretched. And on the terrain, we can see it on an everyday basis and week by after week. They are doing the Russian thing, little by little, that, you know, crab chameleon advancing, usually sideways, massive artillery, you know, the meat grinder. This is not, and it's for them, the most important thing is not to conquer territory. It's the famous objectives of the special military operation: demilitarization and denazification at different levels. We can have a philosophical discussion about what denazification means. Essentially, get rid of all these sub-Nazi, crypto-Nazi, neo-Nazi, semi-fascistic, totally fascistic factions in power in Kiev and in Western Ukraine. So, and this is a process that's going to take a long time, but they're not going to abandon it. And in terms of how far the front line will go, this is a Russian decision. And when the war is going to end, it will be a Russian decision. It will decide it on the battlefield, and all these plans, you know, this fabulous, fantasistic plans that are being floated by, you know, crypto Trump, advisor, underground Trump, parallel Trump, lateral Trump, overarching Trump, or whatever. We know the Russian response to all that. If he doesn't follow those what was outlined by Putin in June, and then in these past few weeks, including the last time in detail at the Valdai meeting in Sochi, Russia is not interested. The war will continue and will continue under Russian terms. Iran, yes, they are outstretched in terms of the death of a president. Very complicated. The new one is not, the least we can say, being very diplomatic, he's not in full control of the whole chessboard. But he's getting there, little by little. And in terms of the two lessons that Iran inflicted to Israel, they were very, very serious. It doesn't matter what these idiots at Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, all this pile of crap is printing on their front page. It doesn't matter. What matters is what Iran has in terms of turning the game, in terms of their super weapons or their very effective weapons that they developed themselves, including their own hypersonics. And remember what that commander said a few months ago, that we have a weapon that nobody even believes it exists. It could be an Iranian equivalent to Oreshnik. There's a lots of discussion about that, which is quite possible. And they are not in a hurry to make a demonstration. Just like the Russians were not in a hurry. In the case of Russia was much more complicated because there was the specter of a possible nuclear confrontation after NATO provocation. It's different. Iran is different. For the moment, their only big problem is, well, we're going to respond to the latest Israeli attack. We're still analyzing how we're going to do it. And they have a vast menu of options, including later on using their Wunderwaffen. Nobody knows what it is, right? So some of these actors of the axis of resistance plus Russia are outstretched, but some are not. So it depends. In terms, of course, what concerns Syria mostly in terms of the relationship between Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah, it's a huge blow. There's no question about that. So this would imply Iran being totally committed. Well, they already said on the record, if Damascus wants military help, we're ready to send it. So this is already, it's part of the equation. They're going to have probably no, they will have to send it because the Russian, the Syrian Arab army, the way it is at the moment, sorry, there's literally, we can say with a certain degree of confidence, there's one brigade that is really good and the rest is whatever. It's not enough, definitely not enough. And of course, Hezbollah, they still need to receive what they were always receiving from Iran via Syria, and they need to find a way or try to find parallel ways to keep receiving all those weapons, those missiles, and of course the human human connection. Once again, Xi Jinping, the people to people's connection, Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, Lebanon. So different. So the disturbing element in all that, of course, is Turkey. What will Erdogan want from both Russia and Iran? We still don't know. It's too early to tell. This meeting in Qatar maybe will be the beginning of zillions of meetings where they're going to be haggling about, okay, so now we're back to the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul. It's like haggling to buy a carpet all over again. And the carpet is Syria. Once again, reminds me, Danny, reminds me, that the most beautiful carpet that I ever had, I got it at the souk in Aleppo. Mm-hmm. I bought the family carpet from a Syrian family who needed to leave. They didn't want war anymore. I said, okay, guys, I'll help you. I'll give you the price you want for your fantastic family carpet. And so I have a direct connection with this Aleppo souk as well, involving a carpet, which is how you make connections in West Asia. There's always a carpet involved, So now this big Syrian carpet, which is, like a bit rotten at the seams and all that, how you're going to recompose it? And of course, once again, it's up to Russia and Iran to give maximum help to Syria. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And of course, Turkey, they will be concentrated not only in their newly acquired Aleppo province, which this is a long Turkish project, a long Erdogan project. He sees Aleppo as a cash machine, in fact. Aleppo, of course, is a business center, apart from being one of the oldest cities in the world, if not the oldest, competition with Damascus, but business center, enormous trade with everything, a key crossroads of the ancient and the new Silk Roads, Chinese interest in Syria. China sees Syria as an embodiment, one of the key embodiments of the 21st century new Silk Roads as well. So how are you going to solve all that? And Erdogan wants to profit from it because he wants Aleppo as an important commercial center, more or less, let's say, overseen by Turkey and Turkish business. And the wealthy Aleppo refugees who are now living in Turkey, they can come back to Aleppo and they can work side by side with Turkish interests. This is their plan. This is the Erdogan, Turkish ruling classes, MIT, Intel plan for Aleppo, essentially. And will Assad convince himself that he lost Aleppo forever? Obviously not. But as it stands, he's in a position of weakness, and even if we have a face-to-face Erdogan-Russian meeting in the next few weeks or so, Putin will be in a weakened position to discuss anything about Syria face to face to Erdogan. So we can also call it Erdogan's revenge to a certain extent. 2024 is the Sultan's revenge to what happened in 2020 when he was more or less this ceasefire deal and this was more or less imposed on him, especially by Russia, lesser extent Iran, especially by Russia, freezing the war. He didn't want to freeze the war. He wanted to keep going. And he wanted a greater, the greater Idlibistan to engulf other Syrian provinces. And now he's getting it. Fell on his lap thanks to the work of his military intel, thanks to the Americans, thanks to NATO, thanks to Israel, thanks to Ukraine. So, you know, all the chips are on the Sultan side. I'll have a chance to see this better next month. I'll be in Istanbul next month, so I'll try to get deeper into the deeper meanings of all that and how. And but we can say that this was masterfully played by this axis. And unfortunately, on the axis of resistance side, they were asleep at the wheel.
And I'm glad you brought up the missile, the Oreshnik, because I wanted to talk about in particular, give it this kind of contradiction I'm seeing, because you're saying on the one hand, which it is, I mean, it is a blow. We have to recognize it as a blow. And we know that the Western mainstream media will take advantage of any, in order to reinforce their narrative, take advantage of any chip that falls against the multipolar world. They will take it and run with it. But what's so interesting is that Russia in particular, and of course we saw Iran do this with its strikes on Israel, but Russia in particular, even just in recent days, we've seen Russia testing out hypersonics in the Mediterranean at the same time that they were claiming, the Western media was claiming that Russia was running away from its port in Tartus, running away because of what's happening in Syria, which I didn't understand because, in my estimation, well, the rebels are the so-called rebels, the extremists,
the so-called rebels,
the terrorists. They're stealing all kinds of equipment, as you said, but they still don't have the ability to attack Russia's navy, which in and of itself is not that strong, but they don't have that capacity. So it's interesting that the Western mainstream media would say Russia is running away, but Russia was testing hypersonics in the Mediterranean recently. Of course, they've tested the Oreshnik, and you've written very much in detail about the Oreshnik's capabilities. So then what's stopping Russia in particular right now? And do you believe it'll keep, do you think that this will hold? What's stopping Russia from maximizing its capacity with regard to Syria to ensure there's a rapid reversal, or at least a stabilization of what's going on in Syria? What do you think? There's anything stopping Russia?
It's too early, Danny. They will have to. They know that. I'm sure the discussions at Ministry of Defense and the Security Council, you know, during this week, for instance, okay, how are we going to organize our counteroffensive? How can we support the Syrian Arab army in the counteroffensive? How we're going to connect with the Iranians and also with the brigades from Iraq? So it's no wonder that they are one of their top generals. We can say that General Ghaffari is Soleimani. It's Soleimani. Not Soleimani 2.0, but the second Soleimani, an important successor to Soleimani. He was Soleimani's number 2, and now he's already in Syria. So you need a Soleimani big brain to coordinate how this counteroffensive is going to develop. So we already have that. Very, very important. And Russia, of course, they can resupply as much as they can, but they're going to have to divert some aerial assets, let's put it this way, from Ukraine. Not a good idea, of course. So maybe they could be overstretched momentarily for the next few weeks or months. But I'm sure they will find a way because in terms of national interest and in terms of a strategic terms, especially, they simply cannot allow themselves to be at a dangerous position, especially at the Hamaimim base, Latakia, of course, and especially Hamaimim base, being, being attacked by Salafi jihadi missiles, for instance. No, this cannot happen. They won't allow this to happen. But it's still too early. Still too early. The counter-offensive scenario starts this week. We have not seen anything so far. Skirmishes, small victories north of Hama here and there, but that's not enough. And the disintegration of the Syrian Arab army is everywhere. You look at Russian military channels, is one bad news after another. So yes, dire straits, but and it's crazy because wars in West Asia, as we all know, they are always in flux.
Right.
And nothing is. It's like being on the road. You are on the road. You have to look around. You have to look at the other cars, the other trucks, and all that. To look at the desert. Look at your car. You have a flat tire or whatever. That's it. Changes all the time. But I think the most distressing part is that this could all have been prevented, and it was not. So it is a major strategic blunder, especially from the part of Syria, and also because Iran and Russia they didn't have the eye on the ball because there are other big balls for both.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's the realistic part of all of this is that while the United States, NATO, Israel, we can throw in there, Turkey, they are heavily invested. So they mobilize these kinds of proxy wars, dirty wars, whatever we want to call them, very quickly, or at least even if they're planned in the making through intelligence channels, etc. They are executed very quickly because they are very invested. And I think it's people forget that Russia, Iran, Syria, to an extent, they're invested in all kinds of other things where military defense, these kind of things, they must be balanced with all of these various considerations, just like Russia's Ukraine. Russia could steamroll Ukraine if it
Yes.
if it wanted to, and if it was in its interest. But what happens after that? How does that impact this overall project that is being built? It is, you always have to contend with the warmongers without a leash. They don't have a leash. They continue to
They
pursue.
don't have a leash.
They don't.
And it all goes back to this now we can call it omni war, a unified war in West Asia against the axis of resistance in every one of their nodes. So, against Gaza, against Hezbollah, against Syria, against the Houthis, against Iran, against the militias in Iraq. So it is what was shaping up for the past, at least for the past year, nonstop. Even immediately after October 7, during the whole year, this was my dear friend Alistair Crook. He talks about the war shape shifting in West Asia. That's it. It's shape shifting, and now it's shape shifting from the point of view of the axis of resistance. They are being pushed against a huge wall in every different subsector and every different node. So this implies that they need to coordinate even more closely than they did before. And of course, they need closer coordination with Russia, all these poles, most of these poles with Russia. And Once again, the Chinese question. This has been bugging me for days, in fact. I hope to be back in China next year, and one of my in-depth conversations will be about, okay, what do you really want in West Asia, node by node? Of course, they will never. This is the kind of answer they never give, especially to a foreigner. But it's worse from our part to ask, important players. Just dreaming of connectivity corridors and investments and all that is not enough, because now you are in the middle of a major regional war where everybody is involved. And you cannot just go there, smile, and say, okay, community will share a future for mankind. Let's build another connectivity corridor. No, it's not enough. You're going to need, I would not say a presence on the ground, but behind the scenes, there's a lot more that they can do than they are not doing. So all these themes are very, very touchy, because they involve how the mechanism of BRICS as a whole and this alliance of multinodal poles is organizing themselves. For the moment, it's very, you see some details and you say, oh man, there's so much they could be doing and they are not doing. Why? And then it's a mix of internal domestic problems, bureaucratic inertia, lack of an overall vision of understanding the big picture, which a lot of people in the leaderships may have, like Putin and Xi, for instance, but many of the bureaucrats, lower in the pyramid, they don't. And of course, being afraid of antagonizing the empire, especially as you mentioned, the unleashed empire, because now it's empire unleashed, but wow, And when Trump starts, just wait, because what I have been qualifying, and some others as well, as the war against BRICS is going to start in January. The real war against BRICS starts in January. So we all know, especially this childish threat. If you try to come up with a BRICS currency, I'm going to, sanction you 100%. Who gives a bloody hell about that? The global South doesn't need the US. The global South can trade and do commerce among themselves. Oh, yeah, okay, so we're not going to export what you need. And your population inside the US won't find anything to buy because you don't produce anything anymore. But obviously, try to explain that to Donald Trump. Forget it. So if the situation is in this, we were thinking, okay, now we have less than 50 days until Trump comes to power. The Democrats are going to go unleashed. They're going to be even more demented than they were before. This new Syria, let's put it this way, tragedy, and back to square one, that you have to reconquer territory that you held, that you had to conquer in the first place. It's a tremendous blow, because it's directly linked to this Omni war, and proves once again that the unleashed machine, they are very much aware of what's going. And if they find any breach here and there, they will bounce immediately. It can be in the Caucasus, it can be in Georgia, it can be anywhere. A lot to mention. So we're not even talking about South America. I wonder what's going to happen in South America next year. It's going to be hell as well. So we are always thinking, okay, Putin understands that. Yes, he understands the chessboard very well. Does Pezeshkian know about this? I don't think so. Maybe Khamenei knows, but Khamenei knows West Asia. He doesn't know much about the rest of the world. That's a huge problem, And see, it's totally different. It's this carefully manicured idea of congregation, community, and all that. But when you look at the specifics, they say, okay, what are you going to do in practice to help Syria? There's not much.
Yeah.
So for all of us who are directly involved into let's try to build an alternative system of international relations, it's very distressing when you see these particulars and these facts on the ground or absence of facts on the ground.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think one thing that
Gotta
is
fight.
very true, I think, about the entire multipolar world with China in a driver's seat role is that we are in a moment of incredible danger of the United States as an empire
Yep.
decaying and
No,
dying
it's
and
gonna have to
being
be true.
unleashed itself, and
Love talk.
having really only chaos at its disposal. But chaos, in a sense, is, even if it isn't, let's say, as effective as it once was, even if it has so many consequences for all involved, it still creates a dynamic where foreign policy that is spearheaded by the entire multipolar world, but expressed in China's non-interference policy and things like this, it
Mm.
does lead to these questions of, well, when is it time? When are the conditions ripe for, let's say, the need to bolster Syria to ensure that there isn't any possibility for the fall of any number of countries that are trying to protect their sovereignty under the most harsh conditions? Because I think people forget
Mm.
Syria is in one of the most dire situations prior to this
Yes.
extremist offensive, sanctions and occupation, and all of this has led to a lot of difficulties inside of Syria, which I think should be taken into perspective when we think about how the Syrian government still remains. But the chaos is going to continue. And
Yeah.
then when does China, and, to an extent also Russia, which right now is patiently waiting for when to, of course, make good on its ongoing commitments to Syria
Mm.
militarily. So it's a very interesting situation, and we will have to keep a pace on it, Pepe. But I wanted to ask you one last question to close here of the last 20 or so minutes. I wanted to ask you about this war on BRICS. I haven't yet had anyone on this show go over deeply the capacity of, let's say, this new Russian missile. But given that Russia has released the Oreshnik and it has all of these capabilities that are a game changer, I know you've written about it, and now you have Donald Trump threatening a war on the entire BRICS. Everyone who is trying to move away from the dollar is going to sanctions and tariffs. You have Donald Trump also, as you've alluded to, making huge threats on West Asia. How do we square this circle exactly? Because we do have a Trump administration coming. We do have Russia sending probably, I mean, one of the biggest messages geopolitically with this missile in a long time. And yet we have this situation, as we have been talking about, which is very much in flux. So how do we square the circle on this BRICS war given these conditions?
We cannot square the circle exactly. We can see um, points of rupture and points of reorganization and closer interaction, in fact. For instance, it's essential to follow what the Russians are trying to do in terms of creating the basis of a different international financial system. Uh, every time that I spent almost over 5 months in Russia this year, and next year is probably going to be the same thing. And the number one preoccupation when I'm there is to talk to people who can explain me the details, the inner mechanisms of how this whole thing is being organized. a monumental task. The complexity is absolutely mind-boggling. But the only ones who are capable of pulling it off are the Russians. They have them in power. They have beautiful brains. They have excellent universities. They fought the power of the collective West, who wanted to destroy their economy, and they counterpunched brilliantly, by the way, several levels. So the problem is to come up with all these mechanisms, all these like what I call the BRICS test lab, testing all these possibilities, uh, then starting their tests inside Russia with Russian companies, and then selling this to their BRICS partners, and especially convincing the Chinese, which are by definition risk averse. Enormous problem, especially Chinese companies, and obviously they are fear of a American secondary sanctions. Consider that the Chinese are starting to get the picture of what's going to happen during Trump, in terms of there's going to be a new different tsunamis of sanctions against China, and most of them, of course, will backfire, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, they're going to happen. This Russia-China collaboration on the geoeconomic and financial and finance tech level will increase next year, even considering that the Brazilian presidency of BRICS is not going to be exactly a top 10 hit. Okay, doesn't matter. What matters is that the main partners are working together and closer and closer. At the same time, we have among the BRICS partners, we have excellent prospects in terms of diversification and better geopolitical and geoeconomic relations and closer integration. Example, the Southeast Asians, which are in full force as BRICS partners. But we have an extremely disturbing element, which is Turkey, which is NATO member. The ruling class in Turkey, as something that I learned these past 3 years, going to Istanbul all the time, over 90%, they are Atlanticists, they are pro-NATO, and they are pro-American. The ruling classes, people who have the money, people who actually rule Turkey. And at the same time, they look around Eurasia, they look around BRICS, they say, we cannot be, because then we're going to become a minor player in our own continent. So how will the top BRICS deal with Turkey as a BRICS partner? Huge interrogation marks. We're going to start seeing this now during this year. And especially now with the aggravating component of Erdogan being emboldened by his bet on greater Idlibistan and Turkified Aleppo, let's put it this way. And if he managed to pull it off, wow, he's going to be even more emboldened. And he's going to start maybe dictating terms to other Eurasian, big Eurasian actors like Russia and Iran, BRICS, among the top BRICS. So I think that the role of Turkey as a destabilizing factor inside BRICS next year is going to be one of the top stories of the year. No question. And we need to know what Saudi Arabia is going to do. Don't forget that Saudi Arabia is still on the fence. We are at BRICS, but we're not. Okay, what is it? So Russia and China will have to have a serious conversation with MBS and say, okay, what's your game, really? You cannot be sitting on the fence all the time, especially now that we have everybody wanting to get into BRICS. It's more than, it's 30. As it stands, it's not 30, 34, 35. It's over 40 nations who want to be united with BRICS, the 9 BRICS plus the 13 partners. So, so this all is also in flux. It's a different kind of flux compared to the highway in Syria, right? So this is, let's call it, this is the multipolar high-speed rail train, which already left the station, but there are some passengers that are still running in the platform. They want to catch the train. Oh, the doors are already closed. But okay, maybe we can stop and open, and you can come in. but it could happen. So, and of course, the BRICS as a whole will have to face the empire wrath, personified by Trump and personified by his deep misunderstanding of BRICS. He doesn't know what BRICS is. If you ask Trump directly, he won't be able to answer you, not to mention his cabinet and his advisors. So, the whole thing will restart again on a much more psychedelic dimension level on January 20. And then after a few weeks, we're going to have more or less the big picture in terms of how far the empire under a new administration is willing to go in their war against not only BRICS, but the global majority, against 88, 89% of the global population. Can they handle it? Can they sanction most of the planet? Okay, we're gonna so we're all waiting for the cliffhanger, for the next cliffhanger, right? But this Omni war will get into an even more complicated stage. I think many of us have been arguing that the real hardcore war is not Ukraine, which is on the way to being solved one way or another, and Russia will solve this war, and Russia has already won this war. We still don't know how. The real war is West Asia, because it's a multinational war and everybody is involved, and US is involved, NATO is involved, Israel as the total destabilizing factor with an apocalyptic mindset, and all the axes of resistance plus the other regional actors. So this is going to be the fulcrum of how this could lead to either a total disaggregation of an international system, or towards some of these actors having an excess of enlightenment, call it Taoist, Buddhist, Epicurean, Stoic, cynic, whatever, and say, okay, we're going to have to sit on the same table, and it's stupid and completely absurd to have the world divided in two opposing blocks, in shock, in total clash, and still with the possibility of a hot war between them. For the moment, we don't know anything, Danny. We are that's it. We are waiting to get inside the vampire ball. We are just watching the vampire ball from the outside. The real vampire ball starts in January.
Yeah, I wanted to actually pull it up. This
The situation in Syria continues to deteriorate rapidly. By aggravating the situation in this Middle Eastern country, the NATO countries, led by the United States, give numerous armed pro-American and pro-Turkish militants a chance not only to overthrow the current President Bashar al-Assad, but also to create their own state on the territory of Syria. By the way, NATO countries tried to do the same in the North Caucasus, in the mid-90s and early 2000s. Back then, taking advantage of Russia's weakening, many terrorist groups made their way to Chechnya and tried to create their own state on the territory of this Russian subject, giving it the name Ichkeria. However, after Vladimir Putin came to power in 2000, the situation for terrorists in Chechnya deteriorated sharply. The decisive actions of the new president led to the fact that within 5 years, the Russian army completely destroyed all terrorist formations not only in Chechnya, but also in the entire North Caucasus. Returning to the current Syrian conflict, it is worth noting that everything that is happening in this long-suffering Middle Eastern country is a link in the same chain. The fact is that the permission to fire Western long-range missiles deep into Russian territory, the attempted coup in Georgia, and the terrorist offensive in Syria have only one goal: to weaken Moscow in the geopolitical arena of the world. With the help of the latest hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik, Moscow managed to bring the West to its senses, as a result of which the NATO countries temporarily decided to ban the Kiev regime from launching missile strikes on Russian territory, using American ATACMS ballistic missiles and Franco-British Storm Shadow cruise missiles. In Georgia, Russia also won a crucial victory, preventing the West from turning this country into a second Ukraine. However, in Syria, Russia is still far from victory. Pro-Turkish and pro-American militants continue their victorious offensive along the entire combat contact line. In 10 days of fighting, the terrorists managed to take control of such strategically important cities as Saraqib and Aleppo. As I said earlier, all this became possible due to the fact that the NATO countries, led by the United States, chose the perfect moment to attack. The West was well aware that the Russian war machine was busy with Ukraine, and Iran had switched all its resources to confrontation with Israel. All this led to the fact that the Syrian army could not withstand the onslaught of terrorists, and began to retreat along the entire combat contact line. Moreover, on the evening of December 5th, it became known that the Syrian army also failed to hold the city of Hama, south of Aleppo. The loss of this strategically important city was also officially confirmed by the General Staff of the Syrian army. According to numerous Middle Eastern sources, the terrorists captured Hama with the help of so-called meat assaults, as a result of which terrorist groups lost more than 1,000 militants. It is reported that at the moment, the terrorists are targeting the city of Al-Rastan, in the province of Homs, which is 15 kilometers away. Well, my dear truth seekers, seeing all this, it is safe to say that Vladimir Putin was betrayed in Syria not only by Recep Tayyip Erdogan, but also by Bashar al-Assad. The fact that the experienced Syrian army is retreating in all directions of the front is the fault of President Bashar al-Assad. The fact is that after the victory of Syria in 2016, Bashar al-Assad dismissed all experienced combatant commanders, and put generals loyal to him in their place. The scariest thing is that these generals had no experience in conducting combat operations and managing troops in combat conditions. Moreover, for 8 years, while the United States and Turkey armed and prepared the militants for full-scale hostilities, the Syrian army continued to degrade and lose all its combat experience. Apparently, Bashar al-Assad was confident that the armed forces of Russia and Iran would always stand up for Syria, and therefore, he so deliberately got rid of experienced and independent Syrian field commanders, thereby weakening his own army. To be honest, no one believed in such a resounding success of the terrorists. Turkish leader Erdogan launched an operation in northern Syria, hoping that with their invasion, the terrorists would create a threat to Aleppo, forcing the Syrian authorities to make concessions to the Turks. However, the capture of cities such as Saraqib, Aleppo, and Hama by terrorists inspired not only Turkey but also the United States. Now, the West received the opportunity to take revenge on Russia for its defeat in the Middle East and bring to an end the geopolitical project begun in 2011 to destroy Syria and create numerous warring states on the territory of this country. However, the unpredictability and inadequacy of Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan may prevent the West from achieving its goals. The fact is that the Turkish president's behavior annoys not only the Kremlin, but also the White House. So, it became known that against the backdrop of the successful offensive of pro-Turkish militants in Syria, Erdogan gave the order to attack not only the Syrian forces, but also the US-backed Kurdish units. It is reported that in the last 24 hours alone, there have been about 8 clashes between pro-Turkish militants and Kurds in northern Syria. Thus, Erdogan also stabbed his American allies in the back, who have been trying to create a powerful bridgehead in Syria since 2011, to contain Iran and Russia. By attacking the positions of the Kurds, who the United States supports, Erdogan is trying to prepare for the arrival of Donald Trump in the White House in order to talk to him from a stronger position. Moreover, Erdogan also soured relations with the head of the pro-Turkish terrorist group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani. It happened after Erdogan took away from terrorists a checkpoint near Jarablus area, from where Turkey is taking out stolen Syrian oil every month. Let me remind you that this checkpoint brought $100,000 to the terrorists every month. In this regard, some field commanders of that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group refused to obey the Turkish generals, saying that Turkey no longer has the right to tell us what to do. Thus, seeing all this, it seems that Erdogan is really inadequate since his actions have no logic. Over the past 10 days, the Turkish president has betrayed not only Vladimir Putin, who keeps the weak Turkish economy afloat, but also Americans and pro-Turkish militants. By the way, insiders in Moscow confirmed that on December 3, Vladimir Putin spoke by phone with his Turkish colleague, where he rigidly warned Erdogan not to play with fire in Syria, and stop before it was too late. My dear truth seekers, to be honest, amid all this, I will not be surprised if another devastating earthquake occurs in Turkey shortly.
Cutthroat.
The situation of the Ukrainian army continues to deteriorate rapidly along the entire combat contact line. Surprisingly, even the most optimistic pro-Ukrainian Western military experts and analysts started talking about the impending defeat of the Ukrainian army in all directions of the front. According to them, the Ukrainian army is bleeding and is no longer able to provide serious resistance to the advancing Russian troops. Against this backdrop, on December 3, 2024, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine called on Western countries to accept Ukraine into NATO by the end of this year. In an official statement, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine stated that Kiev would renounce any security guarantees other than joining NATO. According to senior Ukrainian diplomats, under the current conditions, only Ukraine's accession to NATO can prevent this country from completely falling under the control of the Russian Federation. However, according to insiders in Brussels and Washington, Western countries are genuinely scared of making Ukraine a member of NATO, especially after they saw the capabilities of the latest Russian hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik. Instead, the West promised to transfer $126 billion to Kiev to support the Ukrainian army and create a NATO command center in Germany to coordinate support for the Kiev authorities and the training of Ukrainian soldiers. However, judging by the incoming information from the battlefield, the West may not provide Ukraine with the promised assistance in time. The fact is that the retreat of the Ukrainian army is recorded in all key sectors of the front, and the speed of this retreat is much higher than military experts predicted. It is reported that over the last 48 hours alone, Russian troops managed to advance 10 kilometers deep into enemy territory, in the Pokrovsk, Korokovo, and Vrymivsky directions of the front. Moreover, a few minutes ago, war correspondents confirmed that Russian troops had finally dislodged the Ukrainian army units from the southern outskirts of the most important city of Donbass, Pokrovsk. According to them, on December 4th, at 2 p.m. Moscow time, fighters of the group of troops under the designation center approached the Pokrovsk-Korokovo highway, covering the settlement of Shevchenko from two sides. Moreover, Russian troops also launched an offensive southeast of the city of Mirgorod, near the village of Promin. Over the past 24 hours, the situation of the Ukrainian army has also rapidly deteriorated in the Korokovo direction of the front. In particular, Ukrainian and Russian war correspondents reported that on December 4th, Russian troops finally managed to take the strategically important city of Korokovo into operational encirclement. This became possible after the Russian army took full control of the settlement of Stary Terny, located near the dam of the Korokovo reservoir. According to Ukrainian war correspondent Bogdan Moroshnikov, Russian troops established control over the village of Stary Terny within 24 hours. At the same time, he noted that a fairly powerful fortified area of the Ukrainian army was in this settlement. I can't understand how we lost such a powerful fortified area in one day. It was a rhetorical question. Unfortunately, our command never learns from past mistakes, Ukrainian war correspondent Bogdan Moroshnikov said. The famous military journalist and expert Yuri Podolyaka also commented on the successes of the Russian troops in Korokovo direction of the front. According to him, the 114th Brigade of the Russian army performed a real miracle by capturing the settlement of Stary Terny in just 24 hours. Yuri Podolyaka noted that the feat of the Russian soldiers of the 114th Brigade only accelerated the upcoming liberation of the city of Korokovo. According to this military journalist, almost all high-rise buildings in Korokovo are under the control of Russian troops. Against this backdrop, Ukrainian soldiers continue to try to escape from the city in small groups, abandoning their tanks and other heavy equipment. Simultaneously with this, the assault units of the Russian army came close to the settlements of Sukhayeli and Konstantinopolsky, to the south of Korokovo. According to war correspondents, as of December 5, 2024, Russian troops have already entered these villages and gained a foothold in the southern part of these settlements. Thus, as you can see, Russian troops continue to cut off the remaining units of the Ukrainian army in the so-called pocket. According to military experts from numerous analytical centers, everything that is happening indicates that very soon not only the garrison of the Ukrainian army in Korokovo will be completely surrounded, but also the Ukrainian army units southeast of this city. Meanwhile, insiders in Brussels reported that at a meeting of foreign ministers of NATO countries in the Belgian capital, intelligence officials of the North Atlantic Alliance informed Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga that after December 5, the Russian army would launch a full-scale offensive in southern Ukraine. In particular, we are talking about Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. Moreover, on the evening of December 4, this information was also confirmed by the former Speaker of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Colonel Vladislav Seleznev. According to him, Russia is preparing a powerful offensive against the southern regions of Ukraine. The colonel of the Ukrainian army noted that this offensive could happen any day after December 5. At the same time, Vladislav Seleznev stressed that the Russian army would not stop after the capture of cities such as Zaporizhia and Kherson. According to him, the Russian General Staff has concentrated a 120,000-strong army in the south of Ukraine. And this army is led by Colonel General Mikhail Teplinsky, who has not lost a single battle in his entire career. My dear truth seekers, Colonel General Mikhail Teplinsky is the commander of the airborne troops. He was also awarded the title Hero of the Russian Federation.
No, he a legend.
It is reported that in the zone of a special military operation, this Russian general won all the battles he led. The fact that the Russian command entrusted the southern direction to such an experienced and successful general indicates that Moscow is preparing to take full control not only of the entire Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, but also completely cut off Kiev from the Black Sea coast, completely liberating the Nikolaev and Odessa regions. It is worth noting that Western military experts also recognize the talent of Russian General Mikhail Teplinsky. According to them, the units of this general always successfully perform their tasks, and at the same time, they never suffer heavy losses in manpower and equipment. It is reported that Mikhail Teplinsky always competently organizes offensive actions and carefully checks intelligence before any battle. Against this backdrop, even Western pro-Ukrainian military experts expressed confidence that the Ukrainian army would not be able to stop the Russian troops in the south of the country, and that in 2025, Kiev would also lose control over the Nikolaev and Odessa regions.
Russian President Putin declared today, this morning, in fact, that plans to damage Russia's economy through sanctions have failed. So now the way to crush Russia is with a nuclear war, I guess. And NATO seems hell-bent on doing just that by any means necessary. Volodymyr Zelensky, the dictator from Ukraine, who of course canceled elections, is now conceding, he conceded yesterday, in fact, that Ukraine has no physical way of recapturing Crimea and therefore winning any kind of war. So peace? No, not exactly. In fact, the head of NATO just overnight said no peace, more weapons. So he's telling Ukraine exactly what he wants, which is World War III. Friend of the show, Tucker Carlson, just landed in Moscow for a big interview, and he warns that we are on the precipice of World War III. Watch.
In the week since we left Russia, Moscow, where we are now, in February, after interviewing Vladimir Putin, we've watched from the United States as the Biden administration has driven the U.S. ever closer to a nuclear conflict with Russia, the country that possesses the world's largest nuclear arsenal. It has accelerated ever since, and it's reached its apogee so far in the weeks after Trump's election. He's now the president-elect. In that time, just a few weeks ago, the Biden administration, American military personnel launched missiles into mainland Russia and killed at least a dozen Russian soldiers. So we are, unbeknownst to most Americans, in a hot war with Russia, an undeclared war, a war you did not vote for and that most Americans don't want, but that is ongoing.
Well, joining me now from Siberia is Dmitry Zolotarev. He is a journalist and an analyst, and he's joining us from Siberia today to make sense of all of this. Dmitry, great to have you here on the show. When you, first of all, you hear the two sides of this. You hear Volodymyr Zelensky's admitting now it's over. We can't win this through physical means. We've got to maybe come to the peace table. And then you hear NATO saying, no peace, more war, more weapons. What do you think be the Russian response to this?
First of all, Clayton, thanks for having me. It's an honor. And speaking about Zelensky, I don't see him as a reasonable person. I don't pay too much attention to what he speaks. The fact is that Zelensky would never choose a negotiation table. Why? Because he knows exactly that Russia's president and politicians won't talk to him whatsoever. Not now. Maybe a few years back. So now negotiations are off the table with him. And someone from his side. You see, Ukraine is pretty much infiltrated with Western-oriented thugs and just crazy politicians who just drink in Ukraine's blood. Let me say that. So Russia won't talk to them, and they do understand them. And as far as I see, no one in Ukraine is able to change Zelensky. No perspective of overthrowing the Zelensky's government whatsoever right now. So the way is just like I see it, when Russia finishes it on its own terms. So really, and I'm sorry to say that the ongoing war is the only answer to end it, unfortunately. And speaking about Russian president, so I pretty much believe that I understand his position. He understands that there is no other way Russia is given than to continue the war. That's all the West is doing now.
With these long-range attacks inside of Russia, we saw overnight, of course, the Ministry of Defense on the Russian side launching hypersonic missiles in the Mediterranean Sea, practicing, showing off drills, practicing for a longer range war against NATO. I mean, this is make no mistake about it. This is a war between NATO and Russia at this point. Now, Tucker Carlson in Moscow overnight interviewing Sergei Lavrov, and it's ominous. Says we have never been closer to World War III and a nuclear exchange. This war is going to continue. So, and you see the neocons in Washington, D.C. that are trying to push for that to happen before Trump takes office, a massive war. Are you concerned that even like before Christmas, this will explode in a way that we can only imagine in nightmares?
Frankly, Clayton, I see this situation two ways. It just resembled me an old joke which I heard when I was a schoolboy back in Soviet Union. If you allow me, I'll just tell it in a few words. There was a prince who wants to marry a next-door princess. So he comes to her father, asks to let him to marry her, and the father says, "Okay, but there is a country, but area, very rich area, which we would like to take, but we are too much afraid because a huge bear lives there. So if you help me to get rid of the bear, you get to marry my daughter, and I'll give you half of my kingdom." Okay? So the prince says, "All right," venturing into the wild. And after a week of traveling, he finds a huge mountain and a huge cave in this mountain, and it smells like bear. He figures out that the bear lives there. So he starts screaming, "Hey, bear, come out, I'll beat you know what out of you." And the mountain turns around and says, "You're gonna fight? All right, let's fight. Why screaming into my you know what?" So the fact is that those strikes into Russia by ATACMS missiles, those are like just, like Scott Ritter said, it's just pinpricks. And the real hard punch is on Russia's side. The fact is that Russia fired this new system, Oreshnik system, into Ukraine was not really understood. They are largely speculating if Russia has enough of it or it's just experimental. I'll tell you this. Russia has more than enough of Oreshnik. If Vladimir Putin says we're going to pump up the production, it means we have all we need. And the targets already planted into the system. That's how the West should understand his words. I would.
But they're not,
because
they don't seem to be taking him seriously at all. I mean, the West is poking the bear. They continue to provoke.
Yeah.
And overnight, we're seeing the almost complete collapse now of all of those areas that Ukraine had controlled in the Donbass in eastern Ukraine. And Russia has categorically taken each of these villages, all of these areas of ethnic Russians that voted overwhelmingly to become part of Russia for the protection of Russia, the Russian Federation. The front is collapsing. Those are the reports over the last 24 hours. So are we about to see? I always say this, Dmitry, the scariest people to deal with are those who have or their backs are against the ropes. They're about to be punched out, knocked out. That's when they lash out in a big way. And I'm worried now that NATO is seeing this, the total collapse of the front in Ukraine, and something big is coming here.
You know, the General Christopher Cavoli, he's a knowledgeable general. He sees it as it is. He does understand what's going on. And there are people in Pentagon who do understand what's going on. So here in Russia, we do not believe that something huge will erupt up to somewhere around Christmas or New Year or maybe in January. But we do understand that Biden's administration and his team are doing all they can to leave the United States and political situation in the world as bad as possible for him to deal. So he wouldn't have any chance to do anything to solve it. So, but to continue the war, that's what they're doing. And I believe that they won't do anything crucial, which would just provoke Russia to respond in, let me say, in a panic way. No panic way from Russia's side whatsoever.
And that's what they want. That's absolutely right. That's what they want. Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham in the United States, they're actively trying to provoke Putin. And it seems like he's been sitting back. They keep doing these like long range attacks, and Putin just keeps saying, you want to keep trying this, but it seems like he's reserved in this. And there has been targeted response with these massive new missile systems, but it hasn't been overwhelming. Do you think he's sitting back waiting for President Trump to take office on January 20th?
Well, Putin doesn't wait for anyone. Putin has an agenda. And he did have an agenda in case Kamala Harris comes to the office, and he did have an agenda should Donald Trump come to the office. So he already knows what he's going to do. He already knows what Trump's team is going to do. Unless we don't have, all of Trump's team on the table. But no, you did notice that some of his speaks are just silent about anything, like Tulsi Gabbard, Robert Kennedy Jr., J.D. Vance, they don't say anything. And those who we hear, they may not be in the office at all. We have enough time to see the changes. Like it just happened. Hexet. He may not be the head of Pentagon, most likely. So, but he was one of the most vocal about we are the one team with Biden's administration. They will continue to support Ukraine and so on and so forth. Nobody in Russia, nobody serious like President Putin or Sergei Lavrov take those words seriously. They are very competent, and then they know the situation in depth. That's why Russia is so cold-blooded, so still, and all the ATACMS missiles which come to Russia, most of them, 99%, are being hit in the air. So No permanent damage has been done yet.
Dmitry, I'll get you out of here on this, which is, where do you see the Ukraine-Russian war ending, or how do you see it ending, and how long until do you think it ends?
Frankly, Clayton, I think the whole next year at last, because
all next year.
The whole next year, yes, that's what I believe. And I think it's the best way scenario, because Russia won't tolerate the whole Black Sea coast belonging to unfriendly state unless Ukrainian government is being changed to a friendly government to Russia, which is unbelievable to me right now. And that this means Russia is gonna take Nikolaev Oblast, Odessa Oblast, right to Transnistria. You see what I mean? So I think, and maybe more, and as long as they push for war, this means the more territories Ukraine is gonna lose. Yes, its army is in collapse, but it does have a capability of some regional fighting. Let's say in Odessa, they have a huge garrison in Odessa, in Nikolaev. So it means the whole next year will be a year of heavy fighting. I see it like this. And many people, many politicians in Russia do see it the same way, as far as I believe.
Well, we'll have to see what happens when Trump takes office on January 20th, and how quickly this could be wrapped up or extended. We'll see if we can hold Russian media just dropped a bombshell about possible peace talks, or de-escalation talks, we should say, between Russia and folks in the Pentagon. So are there smart people in the Pentagon who are trying to undermine the warmongers in the Biden administration? This is happening at the same time, of course, that the warmongers in Washington, D.C. and NATO are actively pushing us into World War III. But it appears, according to reports, that President Trump and Russian officials are separately and quite actively trying to prevent a nuclear war. Back channel talks are happening as we speak. Amazingly good news. So that's positive. We are an anti-war show here. All of the legacy media desperately wants war because that's how they make a lot of money. That's how CNN makes money. That's how the Washington Post makes money. That's how all these big publications make money. They absolutely want that. We don't. Well, I plan to get to that part of the story in a second here, but first, the warmongers in the Biden administration want an escalated war with Russia. They've been pushing for it. They're demanding $24 billion more in order to funnel it into that country, a country that has been destroyed, of course, because of their proxy war. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the de facto United States president at this point, once again is asking Ukraine to lower its conscription age so that children can fight and die on the front lines, essentially. Now, I played you the soundbite yesterday. The State Department is doubling down on this push to get children, basically, well, I say children, but I look at an 18-year-old young boy. I think like my son is 14, 4 years away from that age, and Antony Blinken desperately wants these people to go fight and die.
Well, because originally the conscription age in Ukraine was upper 20s. They've since lowered it, but it still is not 18 or 21. And so he just does not care that young men go free. He really wants them to fight Russia.
So listen to him say this.
And finally, mobilization. This is critical because even with the money, even with the munitions, there have to be people on the front lines to deal with the Russian aggression. Ukraine has hard decisions to make about further mobilization, but these are necessary decisions. We have a commitment, though.
Criminal.
For every person, every soldier that Ukraine mobilizes, we're committed to making sure that they have the training and the equipment they need to effectively defend the country. And again, that's what we focused on. Going forward, as I said, Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership, but we're focused on this in a practical way. We set up a dedicated NATO.
Yeah.
He's lying. And in fact, Ukrainian soldiers have said that their training manuals are in English, which they cannot read. Also, how would we feel if a foreign government came in and said, we think more of your children need to be conscripted to fight? We would kick that person right out and say, go mind your own business. But
no, if that
we
happened,
get to say, because of all the money and weapons that we've sent.
if that happened in the United States, the parrot mockingbird media, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, would make a case for it.
Yeah.
They would publish pieces about how that's a great idea that we send younger children to die because they love war, because they're the worst. And Caitlin Johnstone, I think, wrote a great piece about this. She's vehemently anti-war. She's anti-hegemony. And she wrote this piece about this morning. Blinken is pushing for Ukrainian teens to die for U.S. hegemony. And she says, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken repeated the U.S. government's new position that Ukraine needs to start sending 18 to 25-year-olds to fight in its war with Russia, telling Reuters on Monday that getting younger people into the fight we think many of us think is necessary. This comes even as polls have begun showing that Ukrainians favor making a deal with Russia to end this war as quickly as possible. This is one of those things that looks more evil the longer you stare at it. She's right. I thought about more and more about this overnight, by the way. They're pushing for teenagers to be thrown into the fires of an unwinnable war. It's like nothing, like a corporation saying they need to hire more staff to accommodate their growing business. And why? She says, to tie up Russia so that Syria can be turned into a smoking crater and allow the U.S. war machine to focus its crosshairs on Iran and China, with the end goal of total planetary domination, all because some swamp monsters decided after the fall of the Soviet Union that the U.S. must maintain unipolar global hegemony no matter the cost. She goes on to say, I love Caitlin. She's amazing, isn't she?
Yes.
Just to take a moment here and take a breath, we need more people like her. She says, Ukraine barely even has anyone in the country from the ages of 18 to 25 for various reasons, many of which predate this war. But the managers of the U.S. centralized empire are pushing to scrape out the few they do have and toss them into the landmines and artillery fire just to keep this unwinnable war going for a few more months. Whether they succeed or not, the fact that they even tried is so profoundly psychopathic, it's actually hard to wrap your mind around. Hallelujah. She's amazing.
It's Hunger Games. I know I say this all the time, but this is the Hunger Games. I don't know how you're Antony Blinken and you advocate for this and then you go home and sleep on your pillow. I do not know how you do that.
So good news, though, at least in all of this. So she's right about that. But go ahead, Philip.
It just like blows my mind that the U.S. is so, I don't even know what the word is, like horrible and arrogant. That why are we getting involved in their conscription? Like what? Like
yeah.
Because we run the country. We run their country. You know. So if anyone's sitting back thinking like that they're a sovereign country and that we don't, you're lying to yourself. Philip just brought up the greatest point, which is the CIA is running Ukraine. We know this categorically. They're running that country. The U.S. State Department is running Ukraine. We told you about earlier this week how Zelensky, the dictator of that country who canceled elections and is now the dictator, has basically admitted they can't win and peace agreement should likely be on the table. What did we do? We said, sorry, we're going to send you more money. And NATO says, sorry, no peace talks. No peace talks. Those are off the table. Mm-hmm. So we are running the show. The U.S. State Department, the CIA, the deep state with the mockingbird media in the United States is running Ukraine. Don't lie to yourself. If you think otherwise, you're an idiot. That's exactly what's happening. But there is some good news because Russia media are reporting that Russian Chief of General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, held a phone call with the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Charles Q. Brown Jr., last week. The Biden administration has cut off all diplomatic ties with Russia. So this is a first sort of a lifeline, maybe, and a first in a long time. And it could be long overdue that they're actually talking and admitting this. Gerasimov said this about the phone call. So the U.S. side was informed about the exercises in the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea, which we showed you yesterday, launching hypersonic missiles and all of those tests. So they communicated about this. And he said this involved live fire drills, launches of high-precision missiles. And he said this was to prevent possible incidents in connection with the presence of U.S. and NATO ships in the area of this Russian exercise. So talking is good. What do we have against talking? At least we know they're having some kind of a conversation.
Kamala Harris had a lot against talking. She was like, no, I won't talk to Russia. No, not without Zelensky.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't. What is Raytheon going to sell us if they're just talking? Like microphones? I don't think so. They're not going to get their profits.
Yeah. And to the credit of the legacy media, the New York Times did report this meeting and said that they were talking about de-escalation. Interesting that hasn't got a lot of coverage. It's not trending, right?
Buried.
But it's huge for us that have sort of been clenching our butt cheeks about whether or not our leaders are going to lead us into nuclear war. Can I say butt cheeks?
You can. So Speaker Mike Johnson, he's rejected the Biden administration's request now for $24 billion of new Ukraine aid, basically giving a huge middle finger to Zelensky. And he said that any further assistance to Ukraine would be decided by President Trump when he assumes office in January. So that bank account is closed through Christmas. You're done. And of course, Anthony Blinken and the Biden administration says whatever we have left, we're going to try to send it there and fast track it as soon as we can. But Speaker Johnson last night saying we're done.
Yeah,
we're done. We're closing off the teat.
Okay,
no more.
I'll believe that when I see it. But I like the sentiment, Clayton.
I do. Do you ever have the feeling that you're being surveilled and hesitate to share things or of interest via text messages or emails with your friends and loved ones? Well, recently, outspoken parents at a PTA meeting and Catholic Americans have been labeled as domestic terrorists by the FBI. These types of labels can be used to allow the U.S. government to surveil its citizens and others who live abroad without legal due process. Fortunately, the founders of Bunker have created an app to uphold people's rights. Bunker is not beholden to any third-party corporation, investor, or
the Biden White House is considering preemptive pardons for people who may get, quote, caught up in Trump's crosshairs. Who would that be? Any guesses? Here's what Politico says, that it could be January 6th members of Congress like Adam Schiff from California, Liz Cheney, who is from Wyoming, as well as Anthony Fauci. We know who he is because of his COVID pandemic leadership. Okay, why would they need pardons? Because if they do become falsely accused by the Justice Department, shouldn't they have their day in court? Shouldn't they have to defend themselves like other citizens? Fauci, there's just some reasons why I'm not for this. Spitballing here. Fauci, manipulated research to throw off the American public off the scent of COVID as a lab leak. He did fund gang and function research and lied to Congress about it. He put in place non-scientific measures like 6 feet distancing that he then said admitted just sort of came up out of nowhere. Okay. Are those things crimes? Again, that's for a court of law to decide. It's not for you and me, unless you are a court of law. But I don't want him to be preempted from ever answering for that. Adam Schiff, we saw in the Twitter files, punished Twitter for not validating that there was Russian disinformation on the platform when they said we can't find it. He also asked Twitter to ban investigative journalists. Liz Cheney selectively edited an Oscar-worthy movie about January 6th, but excluded exculpatory evidence in her investigative committees. All these people, sure, are heinous. Are they criminals? I don't know, but I don't want them to not have to answer for this. If there is some part of the law that can prosecute them, they should have their day in court. They should have to fight it like everybody else. I think this could totally implode our court system. Why would some people have to answer for their actions and others not? It's a total perversion on a partisan nature of our entire system.
Well, Scott Rose in our chat here on YouTube says, what the F is a preemptive pardon in the first place?
Right. So it's interesting because most pardons are for people who have already served their time and you're just wiping it off their record. So now we have this whole idea of preemptive pardons. It's perplexing.
Like pre-crime, like Minority Report. You might do this.
You're admitting that they're guilty. Like they're guilty, so let's pardon them now.
Well, that's the thing. Like the presidential pardon powers, like, they can like basically say, okay, you're no longer guilty of these crimes, but there has to be a crime. Like, what the hell are you pardoning? Is it just like carte blanche? Like you can just go, like, can the president just give somebody like immunity? Like they can just go commit whatever crime they want and nobody can do anything about it. Like, do they have that
like
power?
a monopoly board, get out of jail free card? You just keep it. the whole time you're playing.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Of course, this applies to federal crimes, right? Not state crimes, which is where sort of, rape and all this other stuff that's out there for like Hunter Biden, right? Still would apply at a state level. Like it wouldn't matter at a federal level.
Right. Yeah. And so, this would be a severe test of our justice system and our Constitution. I think most people are not for it, except sort of blindly accepting liberals who love COVID and love the pandemic and love the vaccine and love January 6th as a tool, as a talking point. But for the most part, I think we all agree that if they are accused, they should defend themselves. And that's how it should work.
Yes.
So do you think Biden would actually do this? He has so little to lose, but do you think he actually has love lost for Liz Cheney or Adam Schiff that he would do them these solids? Or is there someone inside the deep state that would, the way they sort of forged his resignation letter, do this? I don't know. Let me know what you think.
Well, clearly he is not president of the United States. So we can stop talking about President Biden making these decisions. He's not. He's absolutely out to lunch. He's not making these decisions. Somebody else is making these decisions for him. As we've talked about on the show, we've had a number of guests who said that Obama pulling the strings behind, Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, these people in the White House. So he's not pulling the strings here. Someone else is writing up these documents, and it's like one of those pens, or like just putting his hand on it, and he's like having to scroll it with a signature, an auto pen.
Right. So what it begs the question is, not just Anthony Fauci himself. Anthony Fauci can't give himself a pardon. He may not be able to lobby Biden himself for a pardon, but who's behind him that was making him, who stands to fall with him that might make Joe Biden do this? That's the more interesting question. That's the base layer that we want to get to.
Well, speaking of craziness, fireworks on Capitol Hill this morning. Congress grilling the Secret Service over the assassination attempts on President Trump's life. How did multiple assassination attempts take place to try and bring down President Trump? And how did the Secret Service fail so miserably at its job? There's still at least, like, that I can count, about 5 to maybe 7, maybe even 8 huge questions about what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, when President Trump was nearly killed and shot in the ear just by turning his head. Let's just talk about him right here. The motive for the assailant. Authorities have still not determined why this 20-year-old Matthew Crooks, if that is the actual killer, in fact, or the attempted assassin, actually targeted Trump in the first place. We still don't know that, and the Secret Service can't tell us. Security lapses, how Crooks even managed to access the rooftop here near the rally without any sort of detection. We know that SWAT snipers observed Crooks nearly 2 hours before the shooting, failed to do anything about it. The Secret Service then faced criticism for not, securing the area adequately, leading to the resignation of Director Kimberly Cheadle. Then what about the accomplices? Because as Representative Mike Waltz has pointed out, there's no way this guy carried this out on his own. Clearly, they had help. However, this was pulled off. There was some sort of help. And he talked about the sophistication of the attack, the assailant's use of encrypted communications. 20-year-old, and he's pulling this off? Really? So who was he working with? The preparations for all of this, the details about how Crooks transported his rifle to the rally site, accessed the rooftop, all of that remains unclear. We still don't have answers for it. What about the fact that the FBI then swooped in and had his body cremated, or his body was cremated very, very quickly, and his entire apartment was swept clean, even silverware removed from the house? So what the hell's going on here? Also, communications failures. There were multiple breakdowns in communications with the Secret Service, law enforcement agencies. Local police reported that Secret Service did not accept offers to use drones for surveillance at the rally site. They turned those down, which could have provided, of course, critical intelligence. We could have actually seen that footage and seen what happened, but they turned it down. You don't need extra cameras, right? We don't need extra cameras over which to scrutinize them. Why was that turned down? So those are like 8, 9 questions. Do you guys have more? Drop them in the chat here. But this was brought up today on Capitol Hill, members of Congress grilling the current Secret Service Director, Ronald Rao. And it started off with this. Representative Mark Green basically says, you guys were so apathetic at your job that this is why you failed. Watch.
It seems almost to me like it was lackadaisical. I mean, it's hard to fathom that someone would say, we don't need to cover this. And the communications issues with the local law enforcement, I asked the question when they came before the committee recently, when everybody showed up on the day, was there a check-in? And there were law enforcement agencies that had never even talked to Secret Service that day. I mean, these are really basic things. And you would think they would know to do those kinds of things. So it speaks of a apathy or complacency that is really unacceptable in an organization like the Secret Service. You know, one of my questions to you is,
then he, then fireworks got even bigger than that. Once he sort of calling out the lies about the Secret Service here and their apathy, Secret Service Director Ronald Rao and Representative Pat Fallon got into a huge fight when Fallon asked him about showing up at a 9/11 memorial as a dignitary rather than a Secret Service agent at the time. They had a huge back and forth. This was an unbelievable moment. Watch.
Congressman, what you're not seeing is the sack of the detail out of the picture's view. And that is the day where we remember the more than 3,000 people that have died on 9/11. I actually responded to Ground Zero. I was there going through the ashes of the World Trade Center. I was there at Fresh Kills.
I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you,
Congressman.
Were you the special agent in charge?
To show respect for a Secret Service member that died on 9/11.
Oh, that you're trying to be.
Do not invoke 9/11 for political purposes.
Oh, that not. I'm invoking this.
You are, sir.
Gentlemen,
And you are out of line.
I would like to ask him a question, please.
You are out of line, Congressman.
Don't try to bully me. I
Order.
am an elected member of Congress, and I'm asking you a serious question, and you are
I
playing
am a
politics.
public servant who has served this nation and
You
spent
won't answer
time
the question.
on our day, on our country's darkest
Mr.
day.
Chairman,
Committee
will come to order.
Committee
will come to order.
I'm
I'm asking you serious questions to the American people. They're very simple. They're not trick questions. Were you the special agent in charge that
No,
day?
I wasn't. I was there representing
Mr.
the
Chairman,
United
I'm
States
just
Secret
asking you yes or
Service,
no.
sir.
Mr. Fallon,
You
your
know,
time's
and did not
expired.
affect protective
You know
operations.
why you were there? Because you wanted to be visible, because you are auditioning for this
I was
job.
there to pay
You're not gonna
respect for a
get
fallen
to
member of
January
this
20th.
agency.
You endangered
You are
President
out of
Biden's
line,
life,
Congressman.
Vice President
You are out of
Harris's
line.
life, because you put those agents out of position.
Mr.
Did you have a
Chairman.
radio with
Mr.
you?
Fallon,
Did
your
you wear a
time
vest?
has
Did you have a
expired.
weapon?
Mr.
No.
I did, sir, and you are out of line.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
I loved that.
Wow.
I enjoyed it.
I did too. So all these questions we still don't have answers to. And again, right now, President Trump has had to take security matters into his own hand, President-elect Trump, at Mar-a-Lago with these like robot-controlled dogs that are like
Can you blame him?
patrolling. No, I mean, you can't. This is the kind of incompetence that you have at the Secret Service level right now. And we know a lot of those people were even contracted. They weren't even actually Secret Service there that day. So, yeah, a lot of questions we still don't have.
Here's a question I have. Does the president appoint the head of the Secret Service? Is that an appointed position, cabinet position?
I believe
because
so.
if it is,
Actually,
we have not seen it yet.
I don't I don't know. I'll have to check.
In which case, he might want to choose pretty carefully. See where I'm going with that.
Yes. Well, certainly you want to surround yourself with the prop. That's what, Roger Stone, a friend of the show, and he's been on multiple times saying that President Trump needs to make sure that those people he has around him are hand selected,
right.
That you trust those people with the utmost authority.
Yeah.
So I'll get an answer to that in a second. I don't know if he's appointed. I know he has to be approved by Congress, but I don't know if he's appointed by the president.
Or she. We've had a female in there for a while.
Did you guys hear about this? Ashish Kumar Jha, former Biden administration COVID-19 response coordinator, he just gave a speech at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and he warned of a new age of pandemics fueled by bioweapons development and natural threats. He called for a massive investment in new vaccines against pathogens that don't even exist yet, and he urged a war against so-called misinformation. But the question we need to ask is, who's working on bioweapons right now, and how many labs are there globally? Yes, Trump got the win, but evil is still lurking out there in the background. Being prepared is the best defense from these globalists. The wellness company's contagion emergency kit, engineered by Dr. Peter McCullough, friend of the show, and his medical board, includes 5 critical life-saving medications like ivermectin, Tamiflu, a nebulizer, hydroxychloroquine. Every household can now have access to these hard-to-get medications that you can keep right in your medicine cabinet, minus all of the red tape. It's simple. Fill out a digital intake form and your kit arrives in 1 to 2 weeks. That's it. Don't wait until the deep state puts their plans into action. Stay ready for the unexpected. Head over to twc.health/redacted and use the code redacted to save $32 off plus free shipping. Again, head over to twc.health/redacted and use that code redacted to save a boatload of money and get free shipping. Kits are only available to United States residents.
Well, the shell casing from the fatal shooting of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson reportedly had these words inscribed on them: deny, defend, depose. Well, that is not just the insurance industry's MO, but also the title of this 2010 book about the insurance industry's failure to pay claims. If you're an American or have any kind of insurance, you know that this is how medical insurance works. They are there to make you crazy. I mean, raise your hand if you've cried trying to get a claim paid before. Anybody? Yeah, I cry all the time, like dealing with insurers all the time. That's just how it works, right? But is that a clue to the motive of this person's murder? Well, the NYPD has released these images of the alleged shooter. The shooter has not been found yet, but online sleuths tracked a city bike that left the scene of the crime. We told you about that yesterday. Now, online, this is turned into sort of a John Wick meets Aaron Brockovich type theory. Some have been celebrating the downfall of a powerful executive for the failure of his industry. That's very Bolshevik. It's a very eat the rich mentality. Former Washington Post journalist Taylor Lorenz, she posted the name of Thompson's successor. People felt like this was putting a mark on her almost, along with some fodder for why the company should be hated for their refusal to cover anesthesia in some surgeries. She has since deleted this. And in a follow-up, she said, well, I didn't really mean for anyone to hurt her. I just wanted people to start a letter writing campaign to the head of these insurers. So that's so novel, right? Or letter writing. She's like, I just wanted peaceful letter writing. Okay, but then she also said this, and this one is still up on Blue Sky with more information about this anesthesia claim denial. She said, people wonder why we want these executives dead. I mean, I don't think wanting them dead fixes the problem at all. Here's another Blue Sky user saying that we should remember Brian Thompson only by his company's claim denials, because United Health seems to be one of the worst. Here's another person saying he has no tears at all for Brian Thompson. He says, no, we should be mourning the deaths of 68,000 Americans who needlessly die each year so that insurance companies like Brian Thompson can become multimillionaires. Here's someone online telling us at Redacted that we're cockroaches for not reporting the company's performance along with this death. I mean, what do? We don't promote health insurance companies on this show. You guys we're sponsored by Crowd Health, which is a health insurance company disruptor. So I don't think that, we're by no means excusing the insurance industry of their demonic business practices. We are saying it's sad when somebody's dad and husband dies. This is a tragic, what looked like a purposeful hit. And even if he was an evil person, I don't think any of us want to live in a lawless society where people take justice into their own hands. This, according to the Daily Mail, is his family. These two boys now lost their father and this woman. So I don't think that celebrating his death, it will change these kids' lives. It will not change the insurance industry at all. This is nobody's victory. If we want to disrupt the insurance industry, there are ways to do this. We've told you about that. But killing people, probably not going to get you what you want, and it's evil. So let us know what you think of this.
Just a real-time follow-up here. Yes, I just wanted to confirm. So the Secret Service appointee by the president picks them, but I was wondering if they had to get cabinet or Senate approval. They don't. So it's just, they don't have to go through like cabinet approval with the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
So the president can pick Dan Bongino as your Secret Service head, but you don't have to get then approval by Congress in that regard. So anyway, good news there. They have to go through the whole cabinet process.
Right. So he can choose wisely, because I can only imagine that Democrats would want him to be, guarded by Ace Ventura.
Hey, Ace Ventura found Snowflake. So, well, the New York Times is under fire from Elon Musk for pushing war and deep state propaganda. The New York Times would love, of course, nothing more than for us to go into a full-on war with Russia or Iran, or they'd love going to war with Iraq. Of course, push the fake. I mean, I think New York Times is largely responsible for the war in Iraq and the propaganda surrounding that war and drumming up support for that war. Full stop. I think you know that.
They had exculpatory evidence that Saddam was not lining up around Kuwait. They knew that.
So the New York Times loves war, and the FBI, a former FBI agent told me that the New York Times is their favorite place to leak fake stories. Just look at the Russian collusion story. The New York Times worked hand in glove, of course, with the intelligence network to publish fake stories to undermine President Trump. Lee Smith, of course, outlines all of this in his great book, The Plot Against the President, which Natalie and I are both reading right now, actually. It's excellent. And so, yes, they have a long history of doing all of this. Elon Musk, though, tweeted today about this war propaganda and said this: the New York Times is woke warmonger propaganda, which then was shared over 4 million times. Posting, of course, what Wall Street Mav posted, which says this: is the New York Times the most dangerous news organization in America? It seems like it's captured by the military-industrial complex. And look at all these headlines. How to choke Iraq. Bombing Iraq isn't enough. American bombs make Iraq stronger. To stop Iran's bomb Iran. Bomb Syria, even if it's illegal. That's my favorite New York Times headline. Bomb Syria, even if it's illegal. Bomb North Korea. Oh, what was the other one? Bomb North Korea before it's too late. Yeah, you don't want to wait till too long to bomb North Korea. Just unbelievable how long they've been pushing for
too
this.
late.
Too late.
Like
too late.
What clock are we racing?
We should have already done it.
Or before they blow themselves up, or like, what's the clock?
I don't know. But not only, there's such warmongers, and Elon Musk is correct about that. They really hate the United States, and they hate the United States Constitution. You can see how many headlines they've written. The Constitution is sacred. Is it also dangerous? One of the biggest threats to America's politics might be the country's founding document. That's right. Here's a whole roundup. Elections are bad for democracy, the New York Times writes. The First Amendment is out of control, they wrote this summer. This summer, it's out of control? How is it out of control? The Constitution is sacred. Is it also dangerous? So in the wake of, the Hunter Biden scandal, of course, they were pushing that story hard as well, and the fake Russian collusion hoax, of course. And then when, of course, that was all exposed, how long did it take the New York Times to actually publish the fact that the Hunter Biden laptop was real?
Oh, they were along with CBS. It was like a full year.
Yeah.
It was, I believe. I'd have to.
I think it may have even longer than that, actually, until, because the New York Post was out in front on the story, Miranda Devine and everything else. But Alina Habba, who is the Trump's lawyer, was at the airport after the Hunter Biden story broke this week, the pardon story. And notice, and she pointed this out, notice what's missing here from the headlines on the New York Times. Watch.
I'm in the airport and I'm looking at newspapers. And I just want you to take a look at this. New York Post, Hunter gets away with it. Wall Street Journal, Biden pardons son. New York Times, zero from the New York Times on Hunter Biden. Fake news.
Zero. Maybe it's because they were so invested in the story, they can't then just capitulate and admit defeat on this. So you recall this was amazing when Hunter Biden came out and emphatically said that his father wasn't involved in his financial dealings with his business. Well, here was the soundbite. This was the actual soundbite. Notice if.
Let me state as clearly as I can. My father was not financially involved in my business.
Okay. Did you notice? My father was not financially involved in my business. Well, then the New York Times published their quote about that press conference. I'm here, Mr. Biden said. Let me state clearly as I can. My father was not involved in my business. Oh, you just conveniently left out the most important word. Mm-hmm. Financially. Go ahead and play the soundbite again. Can we, Philip?
I am here. Let me state as clearly as I can. My father was not financially involved in my business.
Yeah. So the warmongers.
There's a great book that I read over the summer called Bad News: How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy. And she tells the history of American media and how Joseph Pulitzer was making so much money because he was selling penny papers to poor people. So he had massive circulation. The New York Times purposely rejected that model. Even when they had the opportunity to buy his papers, they rejected it because they had to sell to advertisers that they were excluding the working class. So they would refuse circulation in certain working class neighborhoods. They purposely don't want working class people. They are selling the elites their own superiority. That is their business model. They could not sell to Rolex if Rolex thought that people who were, I guess, coal miners were reading the New York Times. This is how they survive. This is how they make their money, is this elitism. So, okay, believe them if you want to, but it's clear that they need to be supported by the deep state. And who are they advertising to? I guess anyone who's watching the show doesn't believe them anyway. So good on us.
Yeah. How many people actually have a New York Times subscription? I'd like to. We have let's see, 40 or 50,000 of you watching right now across all our platforms. How many of you actually would ever pay to have a New York Times subscription? Just curious.
I actually do. I do specifically for the reason of, because sometimes I have to pull articles for edits and get.
I use Archive for that.
I never read it.
Oh, you should cancel your subscription.
Don't say that, because that's stored. We're not telling you to cancel, but I use Archive for that.
Okay.
Well,
I mean, we can't tell you what to pay for and what not to.
I can't seem to unsubscribe. I can't seem to unsubscribe from their email list because I keep trying, and then they put me on like 45,000 New York Times email list. So they're like, well, this is the Christmas list. You need to unsubscribe from that. You need to. So yeah, but
the cooking list, the Christmas list.
Right. Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah. Our chat overwhelmingly says, no way.
It's like a gym membership. You can't get out.
Divorce. Just T says, all right, Philip, you got to get a divorce from you've got to do it. Most of their subscribers are government offices.
Never read it.
Yeah.
It's not like I ever open it and read it. I just have to grab headlines on occasion.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, did you know that AI has hallucinations, like kind of drug trips? That's what they call it when AI tells you something that's totally nonsense.
Israel and Hezbollah a true ceasefire?
It's a true ceasefire only if you believe that a ceasefire only can apply to one party, and that party is supposed to be Hezbollah in the eyes of Israel and the U.S. The U.S. and Israel obviously reached an agreement where Israel retains the right to break the ceasefire at will, and that's why it continues to carry out strikes inside Lebanon, because it refuses to abide by any agreement that constrains its monopoly on force. And that's at the heart of the problem here. Israel insists on having a monopoly on violence in the region. That's why there's a resistance axis to it from states that don't accept Israel's monopoly on violence and its self-professed right to occupy Palestinians and steal their land. And so that's why Israel, consistent with its fundamental doctrine that it has the right to maintain the monopoly on violence and instill fear in anybody who resists it, that's why it continues to carry out these strikes inside Lebanon.
And is there a side agreement between Israel and the United States that modifies, interprets, expands, whatever, the actual agreement that the people from Hezbollah signed?
As far as I know, it's not officially confirmed, but there have been reports that there is a side agreement, and I would bet strongly that there is. And even if it's not even written down, you just know that given that Biden has offered unconditional support to Israel for more than a year as it commits mass murder against a defenseless death camp, that there is an understanding that basically between Netanyahu and Biden, I'm sure the message was conveyed that, give Biden a win here, have this ceasefire, which he can announce publicly and take credit for it, but go ahead and do what you want. That was what Amos Hochstein, Biden's Israeli-born envoy, was trying to insist on before. He was trying to get Hezbollah to basically accept conditions under which Israel could continue to carry out operations inside Lebanon if it wanted to, And when Hezbollah didn't formally agree to that, I think the Biden administration just decided that we'll let Israel go ahead and do that anyway and claim that we brokered a ceasefire.
You have written a very intriguing theory that the ICC indictment of Netanyahu may actually have played a role in the crafting of this agreement with Hezbollah. Did I correctly interpret what you wrote?
Yes, and people like Ali Abunimah, a friend of mine, who's the editor of the Electronic Intifada, he noted that France played a very key role in brokering the agreement, the so-called ceasefire agreement inside Lebanon. And what did France immediately do after the ceasefire was announced? It said that it's not going to enforce the ICC indictment against Netanyahu if he travels on its soil. So that could be a case where, as an incentive to Israel for agreeing to France's role and for accepting the ceasefire, France then offers the condition, offers the incentive to Israel that it won't enforce the ICC warrant, therefore breaking international law. Because if you're a party to the Rome Statute, you have to enforce international law. But of course, as we've seen in Gaza, international law is out the window if it's in the service of Israeli-U.S. hegemony.
And the French government collapsed today. Now, I don't know if this is the premier that made this agreement or if it was President Macron. I'm not that familiar with how the French power is divided between the two of them, or how long-lasting this agreement will be. But I suppose that Bibi and Sarah can visit Paris without worrying about him ending up in a jail cell.
Yeah, and the question for them is whether they'll bring their dirty laundry, as they're known to do when they come to the U.S. They bring suitcases. This is true. They bring suitcases full of their dirty laundry to get the U.S. government to wash it for them. And maybe they'll
Why
do that.
do they do that? Why don't they just clean their own laundry?
Who knows with these people? And maybe there's some sort of symbolic thing there where the Israelis are so entitled that Netanyahu just wants to remind everyone when he comes to Washington that he can do whatever he wants, including getting Washington to handle his dirty laundry.
Chris, can you put up the photo of the lunch at Mar-a-Lago? That, of course, is the president-elect, his favorite Israeli acolyte, Senator Graham, Mrs. Netanyahu, and their son, Yair. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. Netanyahu. Did she bring dirty laundry with her to Mar-a-Lago? Trump would have a fit.
Well, if not literally, then certainly figuratively, because they're trying to enlist Trump in their project to have continued carnage in the Middle East, to take over the parts of Gaza that Israel wants, and to expand their either occupation in the West Bank and the illegal settlements or colonies in the occupied West Bank. And Trump,
do you expect any difference whatsoever in the treatment of Israel between the administration of Joe Biden and the coming administration of Donald Trump?
I think Mary Madelson is going to get what she paid for, more than $100 million for Trump's acquiescence to, this militarist Israeli agenda. That's what Trump is on board with so far. He's recently quoted saying he's going to make Israel great again. So making it clear that his agenda is not about making America great again. It's about making Israel great again. And in that conception, that means letting Israel steal more Palestinian land and kill more Palestinians. So unfortunately, no, despite Trump exploiting the fact that Democrats were enabling a genocide, he went to Michigan, met with Muslim leaders, put out flyers that were a tacit criticism of the Biden administration for enabling genocide. He's now turning around and selling out the people who he promised to bring peace to, and he's fully on board with the Israeli agenda.
Is there a coincidence between the public announcement of the agreement between Hezbollah and Israel and the commencement of wider hostilities in Syria?
I think it's directly related. These groups inside Syria that control the province of Idlib, that's the only so-called rebel-controlled province inside Syria, and it's controlled by a group named HTS, which is just a name change from its original, which is Al-Qaeda. It's founded by the founding leader of the Al-Qaeda franchise in Syria. His name is al-Jawlani. Al-Jawlani also is the former deputy to the founding caliph of ISIS, Baghdadi. And so al-Jawlani went to Syria, changed their name to Nusra, and then they went through a few other name changes. Finally, this is their latest name. They're called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is HTS. And they took fully advantage of the fact that their main enemies, which is Syria Hezbollah and their ally Iran were tired and worn down after years of, first of all, Israeli strikes on Syria, and also Hezbollah's fight against Israel in Lebanon. And Al Qaeda took full advantage of that and launched this operation as soon as the ceasefire was brokered. Why didn't they do that before? I think the answer there is that it would have looked it would be too obvious if the Al Qaeda group in Syria was also attacking the Syrian government and its allies, Hezbollah, while also Hezbollah was fighting Israel. So I think they did the next best thing. As soon as the agreement was reached, Hezbollah fighters are exhausted. They're trying to repair their own country, which has been devastated by Israeli strikes. And that's when Nusra, backed by Turkey, it appears, took full advantage. And there's a whole long story here. I don't think the U.S. was directly involved in this operation by al-Nusra, but certainly there's a long record of U.S. actions in Syria that made this operation possible.
Chris, do we have the clip of then General Austin testifying before Senator Ayotte? This is crazy if you haven't seen this. This is 10 years ago when he's a four-star general. He's the commander of CENTCOM, and he has just revealed under oath and publicly that the government has spent $500 million, $500 million, training Syrian fighters to fight against President Assad. And the question is, how many fighters? Did you see this clip? No, where do you see this? The question is, how many fighters did you train? Watch this.
It's a small number, and the ones that are in the fight is we're talking four or five.
As I see it right now, this 4 or 5 U.S. trained fighters, let's not kid ourselves, that's a joke.
They spent $500 million to train 4 or 5 fighters. How much have they spent on 1,000 troops in Syria, as Phil Giraldi says, stealing oil?
Judge, the sad thing is, I wish the scandal only was just what Austin said, that we've spent $500 million and have only been able to train, 4 or 5 rebel fighters. I wish that was the only story. Unfortunately, the real story is exponentially worse. The U.S., via the CIA, spent billions of dollars, about $1 out of every $15 in the CIA's budget, arming an insurgency that it knew was dominated by Al Qaeda. And this was laid out very early on by Jake Sullivan, who's currently the person in charge of national security for the U.S., in an email to Hillary Clinton back in February 2012, so just months after the unrest in Syria broke out. Sullivan wrote to Clinton, quote, "Al Qaeda is on our side in Syria." And what Sullivan knew very early on, along with the rest of his colleagues, was that the insurgency that the U.S. was arming via the CIA was dominated by Al Qaeda. Everybody knew that. And I've spoken to a former CIA analyst who was, his beat was Syria during this time, David McCloskey, and he said, we knew that the insurgency was dominated by Al Qaeda, but he said there was no even debate about it. There was no debate. He says it was problematic, but there's no debate because that's another case where hegemony and the need to overthrow governments that we deem to be, against our interests because they're not under our control, it trumped national security. The fact that the U.S. was willing to arm an insurgency dominated by the same group that attacked the U.S. 10 years earlier on 9/11. And that was the policy. And this insurgency, this was under Obama, and it continued for many, many years until finally Trump shut it down when he took office. And Trump said, it turns out a lot of our weapons were going to Al Qaeda. That's exactly what happened. I don't think the U.S. was directly arming Al Qaeda itself, but the U.S. was directly arming insurgents that fought alongside Al Qaeda. And without that support, without arming this Al Qaeda dominated insurgency, Al Qaeda would not have been able to capture its Idlib stronghold. And so after taking Idlib, the province of northwestern Syria in the spring of 2015, Al Qaeda's had this place to rule. They've expelled Christians, they've massacred Druze, and it's from Idlib that the iteration of Al Qaeda, now known as HTS, it's from there that they launched this offensive that now has reached the city of Aleppo. So I don't think the U.S. was directly involved in this current operation, but without the U.S. arming this Al Qaeda dominated insurgency, without the U.S. also keeping its troops in Syria and stealing Syria's oil and wheat, and without the U.S. also imposing sanctions that have impoverished Syria and made it impossible to rebuild from this decade-long war, and without hundreds of Israeli strikes on Syria and their allies, like Hezbollah, this offensive by al-Qaeda would not have been possible.
And what are 1,000 American troops doing there? Are they literally stealing oil or protecting Conoco while it steals?
There's two great bipartisan sources for what the U.S. troops are doing. The first is Donald Trump. After Trump ordered U.S. troops out of Syria, but he was undermined by his own generals, rather than fight them, he just fell in line and he said, okay, we're there to take the oil. We're there to take the oil. So he admitted what the actual real goal in Syria was. The official pretext is that we're there to fight ISIS. But as I've shown in previous reporting, based on Pentagon reports, there's barely any fighting at all by the U.S. against ISIS. What they're doing, as Trump said, is take the oil. Another person who admitted this is Dana Stroul, who until recently was a senior official in the Pentagon under Biden. And a few years ago, during the Trump administration, when she was on something called the Syria Study Group, which is a congressional adjacent group looking at Syria, she said that we are in Syria because we own the territory that holds the valuable oil and wheat. And that gives us leverage to shape Syria's future. So what she was admitting is that the U.S. was stealing Syria's oil and wheat, because she's also said that much of Syria is rubble and the Assad is desperate for reconstruction. So holding on to Syria's oil and wheat while Syrians are starving and living in poverty and trying to rebuild from a war, that gives us leverage to shape Syria's future. So it all comes down to the U.S.'s self-declared right to choose Syria's leadership, to flood it with weapons. And then when the insurgency dominated by al-Qaeda that we support is defeated, then we're going to at least punish the government and hold leverage over it to help shape its future.
Are American forces involved in any hostilities against President Assad?
Well, Max Blumenthal pointed this out. There has been at least one U.S. military bombing so far near Deir al-Zur, I believe. And you can make the case, if you look at that is yet another example of the U.S. acting as the de facto air force of al-Qaeda. If they're bombing Syrian government forces and their allies, then yes. I haven't verified this instance myself, but if it is true that actually there was recently a U.S. military bombing of Syrian government allied forces, then yeah, that's a case where the U.S. is taking the side of the al-Qaeda-led insurgents.
Over the weekend.
But to be clear, this was not in Aleppo where the insurgents took over. This was in a different region. But still, it's part of the same dynamic.
Why does the United States want Assad out? Is it because Netanyahu wants him out?
Netanyahu certainly wants him out. And yes, basically, Syria is the last Arab state that is part of the axis of resistance that has insisted on Palestinians' right to self-defense and lets Hezbollah obtain weaponry through its territory from Iran. And it's been a long time, going back many years, obsession of the U.S. and Israel to destroy Syria and install a more pliant leader, even though Assad at times has tried to make deals because he wants back the land that Israel stole in 1967, the Golan Heights. But because he's still a part of the axis of resistance, that's why he's been the target for regime change. Ehud Barak, the former Israeli defense minister and prime minister, he said in 2012, just as the Syria war was really exploding, he said that if we overthrow Assad, this will be great for us because it would undermine the axis of resistance led by Iran.
Recently, President-elect Trump issued a rather startling statement on his Truth Social. You may have heard this. Those responsible, he's referring to the capturing of Israeli hostages, will be hit harder than anybody has been hit in the long and storied history of the United States of America. What is he talking about?
He's doing what Trump does, which is issuing threats, looking like a tough guy, and telling Hamas that it's going to face, I don't know, some new, like another level of genocide. I mean, they're already facing a genocide, so I'm not sure what more Trump can threaten beyond using nuclear weapons. But that's just Trump trying to look tough and trying to appease his, anti-Palestinian, pro-Israeli government donor class. What he will actually do upon taking office, especially after he campaigned on being the president of peace and ending all these wars, I don't know.
Didn't I should have asked you this earlier when we showed Secretary Austin as General Austin, but didn't Secretary Austin actually threaten the Israeli government if it didn't allow a certain modicum of aid into Gaza, the United States would respond by holding up everything we give to them. And then when the time came, did nothing. Nothing.
That's exactly what happened. Secretary Austin and Secretary of State Antony Blinken wrote that letter to Israel shortly before the U.S. election, saying that unless you allow more humanitarian aid, there will be unspecified consequences. And of course, what happened when the U.S. deadline passed and there was still a starvation siege by Israel of northern Gaza? Biden did nothing. That's perfectly consistent with his policy going back more than a year.
Do you think that the United States had anything to do with the attempted coup in South Korea, the proclamation for martial law, which was eventually rescinded 6 hours later? There wasn't a peep out of the White House. There wasn't a peep out of the State Department, the Defense Department, the U.S. ambassador, or the commanding general of 28,000 troops right there.
Yeah, well, given how much influence the U.S. has in South Korea, including a massive troop presence, I do think that's fair to speculate. I haven't looked into this too closely, but I have to wonder here about the connection to Ukraine. And the connection to Ukraine, by the way, also has a spillover into Syria, which I'll get to in a second. But what's happening in Ukraine? You have the U.S. and Ukraine accusing Russia of fighting alongside North Korean troops. And this is why the Biden administration claims it gave Ukraine permission to use ATACMS missiles to strike into Russia, because allegedly North Koreans are fighting alongside of Russia. But yet, where's the evidence for these North Korean troops fighting alongside Russia?
Isn't that pretty much recognized as bogus right now?
Well, that's what I think. Yeah, and the only evidence that I've seen Ukraine try to put out is some photos of some soldiers who look mildly Asian. But again, that region is in Eurasia, and so people are going to maybe look like they come from that continent, from that region. And there's no evidence that these soldiers are actually North Korean. There were North Koreans inside Russia training with Russian troops, but that goes back many years. And so I wonder to what extent South Korea is now feeling the spillover effects of that, because they've been under pressure not only to arm Ukraine, but to send troops into Ukraine to fight these fictional North Koreans. And I wonder if this martial law attempt is a part of is a response to perhaps some pushback from that against the government on that. It's worth speculating because of the pressure that South Korea is under. And where does this martial law come from? Is this just about a budget issue and an internal dispute over some parliamentary issues? I don't think so. So I do think it's fair to speculate what the role of Ukraine is here. And then think about the role of Ukraine and what happened in Syria. It was just reported in the New York Times that Moaz Mustafa, who's a State Department funded lobbyist inside Washington, lobbies for crossing sanctions on Syria, and is in close contact with the Al-Qaeda-led insurgency. He said that the insurgents in Syria were in close touch with Ukraine and are cooperating in some ways, and that they wanted to basically take advantage of Russia's weakened position. So this is just an example that, supporting U.S. hegemony in one country will have a spillover effect in others. That, this proxy war in Ukraine has had this massive spillover effect, and now it's fueling a crisis that had died down in Syria. That was a brutal war where there were so many people died. The country was, in large parts of it left in rubble. I've seen it myself. It's horrible what happened inside Syria. And now, in due part because of the proxy war in Ukraine, we're seeing violence reignite inside of Syria. It's like we're on this constant feedback loop based on decisions taken by the team in office right now. It was under Obama and Biden that the U.S. launched this dirty war in Syria. It was under them that they overthrew the government of Libya and then used weapons looted from Libya to arm the Al-Qaeda-dominated insurgency inside of Syria. And by the way, that's why Christopher Stevens, the ambassador, and other Americans lost their lives. They were at the annex in Benghazi that was being used to run guns from the looted Libyan stockpile into Syria. And now we have Syria once again flaring up into another catastrophe. So these hegemonic decisions don't just have an impact on the country directly being targeted. There's a massive spillover effect and blowback everywhere.
This is a brilliant analysis you've just given us. And I don't see any hope for reform of this behavior. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard has her own views of this, but the CIA will do what it wants under John Ratcliffe and do what it wants under Donald Trump. This is only going to get worse, not better.
Well, it is important to note that there are people now in high positions, Tulsi Gabbard, if she gets confirmed, and Donald Trump himself, who have recognized this reality before. When Trump ran for office in 2016, he recognized that the U.S. was fueling an Al Qaeda dominated insurgency. He even said, he even accused Obama of creating ISIS, which, I think was an exaggeration, but there's truth to it in the sense that, the invasion of Iraq, which wasn't under Obama, it was under Bush, that created ISIS. And then the U.S. did sit back and watch. And as John Kerry admitted, Obama's Secretary of State, the U.S. sat back and watched as ISIS spread in Syria because the U.S. wanted to use the growth of ISIS as leverage to oust Assad. So Trump is aware of this history. So is Tulsi Gabbard. She's spoken up about it before, very bravely, I should add. But so which version of Tulsi Gabbard and Donald Trump will show up when they take office in January? We'll find out. But as you indicated, it's very difficult to go up against an entrenched bureaucracy that has a habit of doing whatever it wants, no matter how disastrous the consequences for everybody.
Aaron,
Concern in the skies outside New York City tonight. The drone mystery over New Jersey, seen flying near President-elect Trump's Bedminster golf course and near a military base. The FAA now taking action. And here's Aaron Katursky.
We are going to be looking at some disturbing videos, strange and odd news stories, and as always, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. Now, is it just me, or are we seeing quite a few news stories that really make no sense whatsoever? We really do not know what is real, what is being manufactured, what's a distraction just to keep our attention, and I'm going to go more in depth about this on Sunday, but I really want to talk about these drones that are seen over New York, Air Force bases, and so forth, because there has been another interesting news story that has recently come out. So for those that are not aware, there are massive drones that are seen flying in the skies of New Jersey, and they are not operating like your average drone. Now, they are the size of cars, and like I said previously, people in the public can buy drones the size of cars, but where these drones differ is the fact that these drones are staying in the skies for hours.
Really low, it's loud,
It's really cute.
and it's huge.
It's so big. It looks so much closer in person.
Yeah, my camera doesn't do it. Looks like a spaceship, right?
So since these drones have characteristics that differ from what the public can use and what the public is aware of, that must mean that these drones are something else altogether.
Unless they're coming from mysterious drones in the night sky.
It's kind of unsettling. They're not up for 15 minutes, they're up for hours. Some are very big, probably size of a car.
Mike Walsh says he's seen hundreds of them over the past 2 weeks from his Randolph backyard and has the video to prove it.
They kind of go slow, they come towards you, then they'll change direction a little. They're all going different ways.
The story of these drones went from being an annoyance to the residents of New Jersey to unnerving the residents in New Jersey, now becoming a much more serious problem. We are now getting news that these supposed drones, or these unidentified flying objects, these UFOs, because technically that's what they are to the public. And again, like I said in my last video, just because they are unidentified flying objects, that does not mean they have any relationship with aliens. But these unidentified flying objects are causing a real problem in the skies of New Jersey, in the airspace. A medical helicopter was headed to a scene of an accident in Branchburg Township in Somerset County on November 26, when two security guards from Raritan Valley Community College closed roads around the scene of the crash in preparation for the medevac helicopter to land and take an accident victim to the hospital. Well, the captain of the fire department contacted the college's security office at around 6:45 p.m., canceling the request for a helicopter landing zone due to the supposed drones flying in the area. So again, they went from being an annoyance in the skies to now jeopardizing people's lives. Because if this car crash victim needs a helicopter, that must mean they are in very bad shape. This is nothing less than an emergency. The supervisor of the security at the public college, Brian Surge, was quoted as saying, "We never found out what the actual drones were. It's kind of a mystery. We were asking around about that, but nobody knew anything. Same description is being used. People are saying that they are massive and they are hovering in the skies for hours. One woman saw a group of 5 of them. Now, it's unclear whether this patient went to the hospital by ambulance or the helicopter landed somewhere else, but the medevac team do not want a drone or a supposed drone the size of a car crashing into their helicopter. Now that these flying objects are causing a real problem in New Jersey, the residents of New Jersey are wondering, why hasn't New Jersey's governor, Governor Murphy, come out and spoken about what the residents believe is a real drone problem? Reading this article from New Jersey 101.5, this person who created this article today, December 5th, even states that it was all fun and jokes until a car accident victim could not get medevac to the hospital because the unidentified drones forced the helicopter to cancel the flights. Now, again, this happened back on November 26th or November 27th, and these drones, or these supposed drones, have been all over the news, and New Jersey's governor still has not spoken out. Being a person who used to live in New Jersey, born and raised, I can tell you these medevac helicopters are vital to New Jersey's roads because those car crashes are absolutely wild. This article ends with, why has the governor not addressed this issue? Where are the New Jersey legislators? It's clear to me that someone knows something. I don't believe for a second that the FBI, the FAA, and Homeland Security don't know exactly what is going on. What is the secrecy? But here's the thing. It's not just New Jersey. We are also hearing news that these unidentified flying drones are also flying around military air bases. They are flying in very restricted airspace where there are F-22s and other very important equipment, and the military says, we are not going to bring them down. Now, I can understand completely that they want to be very cautious about these drones flying over residential New Jersey areas and not shoot them down because they can cause a lot of harm and a lot of damage to somebody or somebody's property. But like I've said in previous videos, you mean to tell me that the military will allow these unidentified drones to fly over military airspace, restricted airspace, and they're not going to take any action whatsoever, even though we are in high conflict time, a high conflict period with countries like China and Russia? Well, on top of everything else, with all these issues going on with these unidentified drones in different locations of the world, guess what news comes out? Space Launch Delta 45 emergency response exercises underway at Patrick, Cape Canaveral. This story came out on December 2nd, 2024, and I'm reading from Florida Today. And it says that the exercises don't pose a threat to the public. Well, why would they? That's a strange caption. But anyway, the article continues to say, don't be alarmed at sightings of emergency responders, military personnel, or simulated incidents near United States Space Force installations over the next few days. The emergency response and readiness exercises will be conducted at Patrick Space Force Base and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station through December 12th. The exercises, which are meant to test and improve Space Launch Delta 45's operations, will involve simulated launch-related incidents on or near the agency's installations. Not only will emergency responders be present, but military personnel will also be present as well. They go on to say that there will be no threat to the public and all safety precautions will be in place to ensure minimal disruption to surrounding areas. The activities are designed to test and improve operations that support national security requirements amid great power competition and evolving global threats. So again, this is just very interesting timing. Not only do we have all these sightings in the skies, but we have all these news stories coming out about these unidentified drones causing problems. And now we have Space Force conducting simulations involving emergency personnel and the military over a number of days, over multiple installations. And I feel like this is all leading up to something big, something massive. And we might be seeing now the beginnings of something like Project Bluebeam, the fall stage alien invasion. Now, I'm going to go ahead and roll the dice, and I'm going to say, I bet next year, 2025, we're going to hear news reports come out that these drones are not actually man-made drones, but they are actually probes from a mothership. They have been slowly hyping us up about this mothership, if you have not realized. There was this news story that recently came out about these unidentified flying drones seen over an Air Force base in Indiana. But along with these unidentified drones, people also said they saw this mothership. This mothership was also mentioned in a couple news stories. Also back in 2023, the Pentagon came out and said there could be a mothership lurking in our solar system while sending tiny probes down to Earth. And like I said, I bet you this is where these drones are going to originate. But make sure to exercise caution here, because I know there are a lot of people that really want this to be aliens. And like I said, when it comes to the government being very open about the discussion of aliens and UFOs, we have to exercise a lot of caution, because the closer and closer we get to the 2030 agenda, which is basically no different than the one world government, where every country around the world has to follow these policies. And these policies were not only laid out by the United Nations, but the World Economic Forum as well. We are just hearing more and more news and stories about unidentified flying objects in the skies. I mean, doesn't anybody find it interesting or question why every state within the United States, every city, has a 2040, 2030, 2035 long-range transportation plan, which is basically a smart city? But it's not just the United States. Almost every location around the world has these long-range transportation plans. They can be under different names, but they have the same agenda, or they're just called long-range transportation plans. But ultimately, these are smart cities. Russia has plans for them. China has plans for them. North Korea, South Korea. Basically, like I said, almost every country around the world has these long-range transportation plans. And the monies are being spent. The contracts are being signed. These are the real thing. Now, if you read up on some of these plans, especially here in the United States, you will understand that stores have to be removed, buildings have to be removed, homes have to be removed, so they can basically build again and build these smart cities on top of these older locations. Well, how are they going to do so? Are they just going to ask everybody to leave? Are they going to force everybody off and then tell them to come back? Or are we going to see a global false flag on the level we've never seen before, involving aliens that are made in the lab using AI, holographics, and so forth? And while all this chaos is going on above the earth, we have these billionaires and millionaires living in their underground bunkers. I mean, it's just so obvious. The closer and closer we get to the 2030 agenda, the government, they become more open about the talks about UFOs and aliens, when before, prior to 2023, it was just a kooky, crazy conspiracy theory. Now, for whatever reason, they are very open about it. The whole hurricane conspiracy theory is all a part of this. When Hurricane Helene and Milton hit, there were all these news articles coming out. There's Biden coming out saying that the government, they are just not that tech savvy to manipulate the weather, to create hurricanes. They're not that smart. News, media, and the powers that be were goading the public into believing the government just do not have these capabilities, even though we've seen beforehand that they do. They were actually blaming China of having these capabilities, but all of a sudden, the government does not have the capabilities to manipulate the weather. And that was all put there. So when the false stage alien invasion does occur, they'll go ahead and say, well, the government, they don't have the technology to control the weather. And yet you're going to want us to believe that they can manipulate time and space and create these massive UFOs, these probes. This is just a well-timed scam. And if you don't believe me, and I'm not asking you to believe me, because this channel is all about theories, but if you don't believe me, just look at the timing of everything. Look at how everything played out in 2023, when the government started to become more open and take the talks of UFOs and aliens very seriously, to where we are heading with the 2030 agenda and everything in between. Just use your search engine to browse long-range transportation plan, and you will see that the contracts are already put in place in almost every location around the world to change the layout of the lands for these smart cities. And once you see that, you ask yourself, how are they going to do this? But
go figure. Follow me.